They reached King's Cross at 10:30. Uncle Vernon dumped Harry's trunk onto a cart and wheeled it into the station for him. Harry thought this was strangely kind until Uncle Vernon stopped dead, facing the platforms with a nasty grin on his face. "Well, there you are, boy. Platform 9, Platform 10. Your platform should be somewhere in the middle, but they don't seem to have built it yet, do they?" He was quite right, of course. There was a big plastic number 9 over one platform and a big plastic 10 over the one next to it, and in the middle, nothing at all. "Have a good term," said Uncle Vernon with an even nastier smile. He left without another word. Harry turned and saw the Dursleys drive away. All three of them were laughing. Harry's mouth went rather dry. What on earth was he going to do? He was starting to attract a lot of funny looks because of Hedwig. At that moment, a group of people passed just behind him, and he caught a few words of what they were saying. "Packed with muggles, of course." Harry swung round. The speaker was a plump woman who was talking to four boys, all with flaming red hair. Each of them was pushing a trunk like Harry's in front of him, and they had an owl. Heart hammering, Harry pushed his cart after them. They stopped, and so did he, just near enough to hear what they were saying. "Now, what's the platform number?" said the boy's mother. 9 3/4, piped a small girl, also red-headed, who was holding her hand. "Mom, can't I go?" "You're not old enough, Ginny. Now be quiet." "All right, Percy, you go first." What looked like the oldest boy marched toward platforms 9 and 10. Harry watched, careful not to blink in case he missed it, but just as the boy reached the dividing barrier between the two platforms, a large crowd of tourists came swarming in front of him, and by the time the last backpack had cleared away, the boy had vanished. The twins came next, both vanishing like their brother before. Now the third brother was walking briskly toward the barrier. He was almost there, and then, quite suddenly, he wasn't anywhere. There was nothing else for it. Harry stepped forward to ask the plump woman for help, but in his hurry he tripped on the corner of his cart and fell ungraciously into someone else. "Hey, watch it," a voice protested. Both Harry and the victim scurried into standing positions. The boy Harry had practically trampled had a pale, pointed face which was, at the moment, twisted into a sneer. Harry mumbled and wiped himself off. I'm going to dash." "Hogwarts?" the boy asked. He was eyeing Harry carefully. "Yes," said Harry. He remembered, at once, his dilemma in getting to platform 9 3/4 and turned to see if the plump woman was still next to platform 10. To his dismay, the entire red-haired family had vanished. "Draco, I expected you to have your things loaded onto the train by now." A couple strode up, obviously the boy's parents. The man had the same pointed face and fair hair, which was long and hung to his shoulders. He also walked with an ornate walking stick. The woman was tall and proper with her nose in the air, as if the smell of muggles quite disgusted her. "I got held up," Draco said in a drawl, casting an accusing glance at Harry. "I'm sorry," Harry apologized again. "I was just trying to find out how to get to Dash." "Platform 9 3/4? The man interrupted. "Show him how it's done, Draco." The boy obeyed. He stepped in front of the wall between platforms 9 and 10, took a deep breath, and pushed his cart through the wall. "Go ahead now," the woman advised, placing a delicate hand on Harry's shoulder. "The train leaves in less than 10 minutes." He pushed the trolley around and stared at the barrier. It looked very solid. He started to walk toward it. People jostled him on their way to platforms 9 and 10. Harry walked more quickly. He was going to smash right into the barrier, and then he'd be in trouble. Leaning forward on his cart, he broke into a heavy run. The barrier was coming nearer and nearer. He wouldn't be able to stop. The cart was out of control. He was a foot away. He closed his eyes, ready for the crash. It didn't come. He kept on running. He opened his eyes. A Scarlet steam engine was waiting next to a platform packed with people. A sign overhead said Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. Harry looked behind him and saw a wrought iron archway where the barrier had been, with the words Platform 9 3/4 on it. He had done it. The first few carriages were already packed with students, some hanging out of the window to talk to their families, some fighting over seats. Harry pushed his cart off down the platform in search of an empty seat. He pressed on through the crowd until he found an empty compartment near the end of the train. He put Hedwig inside first, and then started to shove and heave his trunk toward the train door. He tried to lift it up the steps, but could hardly raise one end, and twice he dropped it painfully on his foot. At last, his trunk was tucked away in the corner of the compartment. He sat down next to the window where, half hidden, he could watch the people outside the train. He quickly caught sight of the boy he'd run into near the platforms. The boy's mother gently touched her son's face and smiled. "My precious boy's first year of school," she said, pride in her voice. "Mother," the boy complained and pulled away from her. "I'm not your precious boy anymore." Draco, the father, spoke next. His face was sterner than the mother's, and far less excited for his son's departure. "There have been rumors that Harry Potter will be attending Hogwarts this year. It would be in your best interest, if the rumors are true, to try and make his acquaintance." The boy gave an expression of irritation. "All I ever hear about is Harry Potter," he complained, not sure what the attraction is personally. Harry had been thinking the exact same thing. He wasn't used to all of this attention he'd been getting whenever he was in the wizarding world. He had quite hoped it might have worn off a bit in the last month since he'd been to Diagon Alley. Apparently, it had not. "Oh, Lucius, let him be," the woman chided. "Today is Draco's day, and it would be in your best interest to wish him luck before he's off." The man regarded both his wife and his son for a long moment, and then finally seemed to deflate a bit. "Good luck, son." His voice was low, but somewhat softer. "We'll be waiting to hear if you've made it into Slytherin." "Of course I'll be in Slytherin," the boy scoffed. He suffered a kiss on the cheek from his mother and allowed his father to pat his shoulder before he clambered onto the train. "Be safe, dear," his mother called. The train began to move. Harry watched the faces of the mother and father disappear as the train rounded the corner. Houses flashed past the window. Harry felt a great leap of excitement. He didn't know what he was going to, but it had to be better than what he was leaving behind. The door of the compartment slid open and the pale boy came in, looking thoroughly annoyed. "You again," he stated when he saw Harry. "That is," he sighed. "Is there anyone sitting here?" he asked, pointing at the seat opposite Harry. "The other compartments are full." Harry shook his head and the boy sat down. He glanced at Harry and looked, bored, out the window. Perhaps he was unimpressed with the scenery, for he quickly turned his focus back to Harry. "Hello, I don't think we've been properly introduced." A light smile touched his lips. "I'm Malfoy." "Draco Malfoy." "I'm Hardash." Before he could finish, the compartment doors slid open again, this time to reveal two thick-set boys who looked extremely mean. Harry started, immediately on edge. These looked like the kind of boys Dudley might order to pick on him. To his surprise, Draco glanced up and waved the boys off in annoyance. "Crab Goyle, what do you want?" he asked. "We were just looking for you," the taller of the boys said. "Wanted to say we're sorry that the compartment is full," the second said. "If you want, we could sit in here, Dash." "There's no need," the boy said, carelessly. Again he waved them off, and this time they slid the door shut and left. "You were saying?" He turned back to Harry. "Oh, those were Crab and Goyle, acquaintances of mine." "Well, partly, I suppose. My father is friends with their fathers, and I know them through association." Harry couldn't help but think that they looked more like bodyguards than friends, but he chose not to mention this. Instead, he relaxed in his seat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve, feeling that he could relax with the bully-looking boys gone. Draco gasped. Harry jerked at once. "You're him, aren't you? You're Harry Potter." Harry attempted to push his bangs back over his scar, knowing that it was too late. He nodded. "And that scar? That's from when you know who Dash." "Yes," said Harry, "but I can't remember it." They sat in silence for a moment. Draco seemed to be seeing Harry for the first time. He regarded him carefully and with a guarded expression. "You're famous, you know," Draco said. "Yes, but I'm not exactly sure how surviving an attack when I was baby is enough to make me famous," Harry replied. "My thoughts exactly," Draco muttered, but he seemed to relax a bit. It may have seemed a little strange, but Harry was glad to have met someone who resented his fame as much as he did. So far, all anyone had to say about him was how amazing he was, when in truth, he didn't feel amazing at all. The silence picked up again, with Draco still regarding Harry thoughtfully. "Are all your family wizards?" Harry finally asked, eager to change the subject to something else. Draco smirked at once and leaned comfortably in his seat. "Yes, I come from a pure bloodline of wizards." That really is the best type, but I'm sure you already know that. You'll find that some wizarding families are better than others. I'll help you with that." He held out a hand for Harry to shake. Harry considered this for a moment. He couldn't say he particularly liked Draco's superior attitude, but he seemed to be a more tolerable companion than one who might idolize Harry for his fame. He took Draco's hand and shook. Satisfied, Draco leaned back again. "I heard you were raised by muggles," said Draco. "I can't even imagine how horrible that must have been." "Terrible? Well, they're not all that bad. My aunt and uncle and cousin are, though. Wish I'd been raised in a wizarding family. It certainly would beat what you had to live with. I'm an only child, and my parents are always busy with important business. They invite other pureblood families to our manor for events, so I've seen loads of experienced witches and wizards. It can get boring being shuttled around to parties all the time, but more often than not, I think it's an honor. I don't think I've been to a single party," Harry said, "unless, of course, you count the one where he accidentally loosed a boa constrictor from the zoo on Dudley's birthday. Well, then you must come to one of ours in the summer." Draco smiled widely. Harry was both pleased and alarmed by this invitation. He wasn't sure he'd be entirely comfortable at a large and obviously wealthy party. He put this from his mind for the time being. While they had been talking, the train had carried them out of London. Now, they were speeding past fields full of cows and sheep. They were quiet for a time, watching the fields and lanes flick past. Around 12:30, there was a great clattering outside the corridor, and a smiling, dimpled woman slid back their door and said, "Anything off the card, dears?" Harry, who hadn't had any breakfast, leapt to his feet and went into the corridor. He had never had any money for candy with the Dursleys, and now that he had pockets rattling with gold and silver, he was ready to buy as many Mars bars as he could carry. But the woman didn't have Mars bars. What she did have were Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, Dribble's best blowing gum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pasties, cauldron cakes, licorice wands, and a number of other strange things Harry had never seen in his life. Not wanting to miss anything, he got some of everything and paid the woman 11 silver sickles and 7 bronze nuts. Draco stared as Harry brought it all back into the compartment and tipped it onto an empty seat. "Hungry?" Draco asked, bemused. "Starving," said Harry, taking a large bite out of a pumpkin pasty. "Why didn't you get anything?" he asked Draco, who had resumed his bored stare out the window. "I don't eat any of that vile waste." He crinkled his nose when he said this. "Not even chocolate?" Harry asked while identifying a chocolate frog. "I try to avoid it if I can." But when he said this, he eyed one of Harry's chocolate frogs, curiously. "Here, one chocolate frog couldn't hurt, could it?" Harry asked, holding out one for him. Draco narrowed his eyes. "I suppose just one, but I have to give you something in exchange." "No, you don't. One chocolate frog, free of charge. Just a little bit of magic to even the balance," Draco said with a smirk. He pulled a wand out of his pocket. Harry leaned forward eagerly. "You know magic?" he asked. "My mother taught me a thing or two," Draco answered. He held his palm open and pointed at it with the wand. He mumbled something which Harry didn't catch, and a chocolate flower had formed in his hand. He held it out to Harry with a proud grin. "Right now I can only make flowers," he said, "but it's complex magic for something so simple. I can also tie shoelaces and stun small animals." He said these like they were astonishing feats which only the truest of wizards could accomplish. Nonetheless, Harry was impressed. Draco gave in and shared a bit of Harry's candy stock, and Harry asked him to teach him a spell or two with his own wand. It felt nice having someone to share things with. "Know what house you'll be put in yet?" Draco asked after a while. "House?" Harry asked. "Yes, you know, the 4 Hogwarts houses?" Draco raised an eyebrow, as if this knowledge was elementary. Harry shrugged. "Well, I suppose being raised by filthy muggles, you wouldn't really know much, would you?" Draco said. "There are 4 houses at Hogwarts: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. When the first years get to school, they each get sorted into one of the houses. I know I'll be in Slytherin. All our family have been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff or Gryffindor. I think I'd leave," he drawled. "What's wrong with Hufflepuff and Gryffindor?" Harry asked. "Hufflepuffs are useless and Gryffindors. Well, they're the natural enemy of Slytherins. Think they know everything. They do. Arrogant lot, really. With far too much pep, if you ask me." "What about Slytherin?" Harry asked, "What are they like?" Many of the wealthiest and most famed witches and wizards came from Slytherin. Draco grinned proudly, like my own parents. But most people, these days, don't like Slytherins at all. There was a tinge of venom in his voice. Why not? Harry asked. Well, because Slytherin is the house where you-know-who came from, Draco answered. Harry could see how this might frighten people away from the Slytherin house. He'd only been a part of the wizarding world for a day, and already, at the mention of you-know-who, he felt a bit of fear creep through him. It's all nonsense, really. Slytherins aren't all that bad, and anyone who wants to achieve anything in life would be better off there anyway. Draco clearly felt strongly about this. Harry wondered which house his own parents came from. He wished he would have had this conversation with Hagrid, who might have been able to tell him. "Play Quidditch at all?" Draco asked after a moment. "What's Quidditch?" Harry asked. Merlin's beard. "You really don't know anything, do you?" Draco said, shocked. Harry was offended by this. "Not like I can help it," Harry said, hotly. "I didn't mean to sound rude," Draco said, though Harry somehow doubted this. "I've just never met anyone my age that wasn't raised in the purest of wizarding families. It's strange to meet someone who doesn't even know about Quidditch." Harry accepted this explanation and asked about the game. "It's our sport. The wizard sport," Draco explained. "It's played on a broomstick. Have you ever ridden a broomstick?" "No," said Harry. "Well, I'm rather good at it. Father says it's a crime if I'm not picked to play for my house, and I must say I agree. I'd be more than happy to teach you a bit about flying once we're in school." Harry was excited about this and listened as Draco began to explain the rules of Quidditch. He had only just described the 4 types of balls, however, when something crawled in through the partially open compartment door. It was a black and white cat with long fur and a rather long tail to match. As soon as it had squeezed through the entryway, it leapt onto one of the seats and dropped a fat toad beside Draco. It then mewed happily and began to lick its paw. "What's this dash?" Draco started, but before he could finish, the door was slid open completely and a girl stepped inside. She checked behind her nervously and then turned back to the cat. "Good boy, Camo," she praised before snatching up the toad and slipping it into her pocket. "If anyone asks, neither of you have seen a toad," she said to Draco and Harry. She had a whispery sort of voice, yellow hair, and very brown eyes that somewhat resembled those of the cat in their shape. Before Harry or Draco could respond to her, she had scooped up the black and white cat and left the compartment. "Who was she?" Harry asked at once. "If I'm not mistaken," Draco said, "she was a Melbark. They're another pure-blood wizarding family. They used to be incredibly popular, or so my father has told me, but nowadays you don't hear much about them. In fact, I heard they were traveling for the past few years out of country. Father didn't expect she'd come to Hogwarts at all. I'll have to tell him about this." Harry was just about to ask another question when the compartment door slid open yet again. This time there was a boy and a girl. The boy looked like he was on the verge of tears, and the girl looked immensely agitated. She had a head of bushy brown hair and rather large front teeth. "Have either of you seen a toad?" she asked. "Neville seems to have lost his." Draco and Harry shared a look. "No toad here," Draco said with narrowed eyes. "Someone said that they saw a cat take it into this compartment. Are you sure you haven't seen it?" The girl prodded after Neville began to sob. "Do you see a cat in here?" Draco snapped. "Keep looking," Harry offered politely. The girl narrowed her eyes and then dragged the boy out of the compartment with her. Draco checked his watch and stood up. "The train should be arriving soon. We should get changed into our robes." Harry peered out the window. It was getting dark. He could see mountains and forests under a deep purple sky. The train did seem to be slowing down. They were just taking off their jackets when the compartment door slid open yet again. Harry was beginning to get annoyed. This time, there was another girl with a rather tight expression and brown hair. She smiled when she saw Draco. "Pansy, get out of here," Draco ordered. "Can't you see we're about to get changed?" The girl's eyes widened at this, and she shuffled her feet shyly. "I just wanted to check on you, Draco, and to tell you that we're almost to Hogwarts." "Really?" Draco said, sarcastically. "I had no idea. Get out, Pansy, unless you want to tell me how to button my clothes, too." The girl seemed incredibly hurt by this. She sniffled and slammed the compartment shut on her way out. Pansy Parkinson, Draco said as they pulled on their long black robes. I know I sounded harsh with her, but she's more of a drip than anyone I've ever met, and she follows me around everywhere. I can only take so much, you know. A voice echoed through the train. We will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be taken to the school separately. Harry's stomach lurched with nerves, and Draco, he saw, looked slightly paler than normal. The train slowed right down and finally stopped. People pushed their way toward the door and out onto a tiny, dark platform. Harry shivered in the cold night air. Then a lamp came bobbing over the heads of the students, and Harry heard a familiar voice. Fur's years over here. All right there, Harry. Hagrid's big, hairy face beamed over the sea of heads. Come on, follow me. Any more Fur's years? Mind your step now. Fur's years, follow me. Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark on either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. You'll get your fizz sight, oh Hogwarts in a sec, Hagrid called over his shoulder, just round this bend here. There was a loud... The narrow path had opened suddenly onto the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many turrets and towers. No more in to a boat, Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by the shore. Harry and Draco were followed into their boat by Pansy and Goyle. Everyone in, shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. Right then, forward! And the fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. Heads down, yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy that hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel, which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbor, where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. "Oi, you there? Is this your toad?" said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. "Trevor!" cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. Only a few feet away from him, the Melbar girl snickered to herself and hoisted her cat closer to her chest. Then they all clambered up a passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around the huge oak front door. "Everyone here? You there, still got your toad?" Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. "We've decided to be generous and put the second chapter up at once for any eager beavers out there." The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone cross. "The Fur's years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fit the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make them out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagstone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right, but Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting. Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we are ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" he asked Draco. "An enchanted hat, Father says. I'm not quite sure how that works, though." Harry had never been more nervous. Never. Not even when he'd had to take a school report home to the Dursleys saying that he'd somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead him to his doom. As if on cue, Professor McGonagall returned. "Now, from a line," she told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got in a line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Draco behind him, and they walked in the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. Harry had never imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard someone whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling up there at all, and that the Great Hall didn't simply open up to the heavens. Harry looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let in the house. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black. Your top hat's sleek and tall. For I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head. The sorting hat can't see. So try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they're just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuff are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you be a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on. Don't be afraid. And don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none. For I'm a thinking cap." The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and then became quite still again. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward holding a long roll of parchment. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted," she said. Abbot Hannah. A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. "Hufflepuff," shouted the hat. One by one, the first years went up to get sorted. Susan Bones became a Hufflepuff. Terry Boot went into Ravenclaw with Mandy Brocklehurst. Lavender Brown became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Maybe it was just Harry's imagination, after what Draco had told him about Gryffindors, but they did seem a bit obnoxious. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Finch Fletchy, Justin. Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. When it sorted Gregory Grayson into Ravenclaw, it needed only a moment, but when sorting Seamus Finnegan, the hat took almost a whole minute before it declared him a Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. It was the bushy-haired girl from the train. She ran up and eagerly jammed the hat on her head. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages, until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he'd better get back on the train? The boy who lost his toad got sorted into Gryffindor after a long while and then ran off, still wearing the hat, and had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. Draco swaggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, Slytherin. Draco went to join Crabbe and Goyle at the Slytherin table, looking pleased with himself. He nodded at Harry before sitting down. Next came Melbark Malvora, the girl whose cat had stolen Neville's toad. She walked up with her cat, which Harry somehow thought should have been left on the train with everyone else's luggage, and sat on the stool in a dramatic fashion. The hat contemplated for a while with her, and then roared, Slytherin. She showed no emotion except for a slight smirk as she joined the others at the Slytherin table, sitting by herself at the end. There were many people left now. Moon, not Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then at last, Potter, Harry. The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the blackened side of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes, and a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now, that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry waited, unsure what to think. What house did he want to be in? You're brave and noble, that's for sure. Not a bad match for Gryffindor. But you have such talent. You could be great, it's all here in your head. Slytherin will help you on your way to greatness. No doubt about that. Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, Slytherin, I wouldn't mind Slytherin. Slytherin, said the small voice. Are you sure? Harry thought about how Voldemort had been in Slytherin House and how everyone disliked Slytherins because of it. Harry did want to prove himself, more than anything, and show that Slytherins weren't all that bad. Plus, Draco was in that house, and Harry considered him, well, an acquaintance at least, which was more than could be said for anyone else he'd met so far. I see. Well, if you're sure, better be Slytherin. Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Slytherin table. The Slytherins were all standing to clap for him, and some looked quite smug to have Harry Potter in their house. The Gryffindor table, on the other hand, did not look pleased in the least. Harry was glad for his choice. A Slytherin prefect shook his hand, while Crabbe and Goyle cheered. Potter! We got Potter! Harry collapsed into the chair beside Draco, who looked the most pleased of everyone at the table. Harry could see the high table properly now. At the end farthest him sat Hagrid. And there, in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him from a card he'd gotten in a chocolate frog on the train. He was the headmaster of Hogwarts. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghosts that dotted the room. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. The rest of the students were sorted, including a Rochester to Ravenclaw, Thomas, Dean to Gryffindor, Turpin, Lisa to Ravenclaw, Weasley, Ron to Gryffindor, and Zabini Blaze, the last Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He had only just realized how hungry he was. Pumpkin pasties and chocolate frogs seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms opened wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are: Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak. Thank you." He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. "Is he a bit mad?" he asked Draco uncertainly. "Mad," said Draco, with a scoff. "Undoubtedly. My father thinks he's completely mental. One thing's for sure, though, he was a great wizard in his prime. Going to eat something?" Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except the peppermints and began to eat. It was all delicious. It was only then that Harry realized he was sitting beside a ghost. He was a terrible sight, with blank staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robes stained with silver blood. "That's the Bloody Baron," Draco whispered over his fork. "He's the Slytherin ghost. Doesn't say much for what I've heard, but can be nasty. I'd try to avoid him if I were you." Harry would be sure to take this advice to heart. As the feast continued, the talk turned to their families. "I'm pure blood, of course," Pansy was saying, her eyes darting to Draco. Harry found quickly that most Slytherins were pure blood, and those that weren't didn't say anything on the matter. Draco had no need to speak about his family. It was as if everyone already knew. "What about you, Malvora?" Draco called across the table. "Is your family really pure blood like they say?" Malvora's cat was nowhere to be seen, and Harry couldn't help but wonder if it was collecting scraps under the table. Malvora sat up straight to look at everyone with a hard expression. "My family is pure," she said, slowly. "And even if they weren't, it wouldn't be any of your business, would it, Malfoy?" This was followed by several chuckles from the other students. "If your family is pure," Draco said, undaunted, "then you should be proud." "I don't really care," Malvora shrugged. "Pure bloods, muggles, there's not all that much of a difference anyway." Draco looked severely offended by this. The table broke into laughter, and Malvora resumed her guarded eating. Harry couldn't help but admire her attitude. He didn't understand why everyone cared so much about their family lineage. Harry wasn't even sure what his lineage was. His mother had been a witch, but his aunt was as muggle as they come. He was glad when the subject changed to classes. Harry was starting to feel warm and sleepy and looked up to the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell, in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and sallow skin. It happened very suddenly. The hook-nosed teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hot pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. "Ouch!" Harry clapped a hand to his head. "What is it?" asked Draco. "In nothing." The pain had gone as quickly as it had come. Harder to shake off was the feeling Harry had gotten from the teacher's look, a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. "Who's that teacher talking to Professor Quirrell?" he asked Draco. "Who?" Draco looked up at the high table. "Oh, that's Professor Snape. He's the head of the Slytherin house and the teacher of potions. Everyone knows he wants to teach defense against the dark arts, though." Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, the desserts, too, disappeared, and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet again. The hall fell silent. "Ahem, just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start-of-term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but he was one of the few who did. He's not serious, he muttered to Draco. Who knows, said Draco, scowling. He's a mad old coot, remember? And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the other teachers' smiles had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a little flick, as if he was trying to get a fly off the end, and a long golden ribbon flew out of it, which rose high above the tables and twisted itself, snake-like, into words. Everyone pick their favorite tune, said Dumbledore, and off we go. And the school bellowed. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts. Teach us something, please. Whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees, our heads could do with filling, with some interesting stuff. For now, they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we forgot. Just do your best, and we'll do the rest. And learn until our brains all rot. Everybody finished the song at different times. At last, only a pair of Gryffindor twins were left singing along to a very slow funeral march. Dumbledore conducted their last few lines with his wand, and when they had finished, he was one of those who clapped the loudest. Ah, music, he said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime. Off you trot. The Slytherins followed a prefect through the chattering crowds, out of the great hall, and down a flight of steps toward the dungeons. Harry's legs were like lead again, but only because he was so tired and full of food. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that they were being led through hidden doorways behind tapestries and sliding panels. They spiraled deeper and deeper down, and Harry was just wondering how much farther they had to go when it finally came to a stop. They were in the dungeon. For a moment, Harry thought there had to be some kind of mistake, because the Slytherin prefect was facing a rather blank stone wall. Surname, said the prefect, and all at once, the wall opened to reveal a passageway. They all walked into it and found themselves in the Slytherin common room, a grand and somewhat cold room with dark green and black furniture, much of which was leather. It was elegant, but dark, and one wall had great windows which looked out into the Black Lake, as the dungeon was beneath the lake. The prefect directed the girls through one door to their dormitory and the boys through another. At the bottom of yet another staircase, surely the very lowest chamber of the castle, they found their beds at last, lines of cots with black blankets. Their trunks had already been brought down. Too tired to talk much, they pulled on their pajamas and fell into bed. Amazing place, isn't it? Draco said from the bed over. Everything Father said was true. Harry was going to comment, but he fell asleep at once. Perhaps he had eaten a bit too much food because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him that he must transfer to Gryffindor because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban that he was happy in Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but tightened painfully, and there was Draco trying to help him get it off, but all at once he turned into the hook-nosed teacher, Snape, who laughed at Harry while he struggled, and his laugh became high and cold. There was a burst of green light, and Harry woke, sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell asleep again, and when he woke the next day, he didn't remember the dream at all. There, look. Where? Next to Malfoy. Wearing the glasses? Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Whispers followed Harry from the moment he left his dormitory the next day. People lining up outside classrooms stood on tiptoe to get a look at him or doubled back to pass him in the corridors again, staring. Harry wished they wouldn't, because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way to classes. There were 142 staircases as Hogwarts, wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. There were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickled them in exactly the right place, and doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. It was also very hard to remember where anything was because it all seemed to move around a lot. The people in the portraits kept going to visit each other, and Harry was sure the coats of armor could walk. The ghost didn't help either. It was always a nasty shock when one of them glided suddenly through a door you were trying to open. Peeves the poltergeist was worth 2 locked doors and a trick staircase if you met him when you were late for class. He would drop waste paper baskets on your head, pull rugs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chalk, or sneak up behind you, invisible, grab your nose, and screech, "Got your conch." Even worse than Peeves, if that was possible, was the caretaker, Argus Filch. Harry and Draco managed to get on the wrong side of him on their very first morning. Filch found them trying to force their way through a door that unluckily turned out to be the entrance to the out-of-bounds corridor on the 3rd floor. He wouldn't believe they were lost, was sure they were trying to break into it on purpose, and was threatening to lock them in the dungeons when they were rescued by Professor Quirrell, who was passing. Filch owned a cat called Mrs. Norris, a scrawny, dust-colored creature with bulging, lamp-like eyes just like Filch's. She patrolled the corridors alone. Break a rule in front of her, put just one toe out of line, and she'd whisk off for Filch, who'd appear, wheezing, 2 seconds later. Filch knew the secret passageways of the school better than anyone and could pop up as suddenly as any of the ghosts. The students all hated him, and it was the dearest ambition of many to give Mrs. Norris a good kick. And then, once you had managed to find them, there were the classes themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than waving your wand and saying a few funny words. They had to study the night skies through their telescopes every Thursday at midnight and learn the names of different stars and the movements of the planets. 3 times a week, they went out to the greenhouses behind the castle to study herbology with a dumpy little witch called Professor Sprout, where they learned how to take care of all the strange plants and fungi and found out what they were used for. Easily the most boring class was History of Magic, which was the only one taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had been very old indeed when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fire and got up the next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on and on while they scribbled down names and dates, and got Emmerich the Evil and Uric the Oddball mixed up. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, was a tiny little wizard who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk. At the start of their first class, he took the roll call, and when he reached Harry's name, he gave an excited squeak and toppled out of sight. Professor McGonagall was again different. Harry had been quite right to think she wasn't a teacher to cross. Strict and clever, she gave him a talking to the moment they sat down in her first class. Transfiguration is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realized they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. After taking a lot of complicated notes, they were each given a match and started trying to turn it into a needle. The class everyone had really been looking forward to was Defense Against the Dark Arts, but Quirrell's lessons turned out to be a bit of a joke. His classroom smelled strongly of garlic, which everyone said was to ward off a vampire he'd met in Romania and was afraid would be coming back to get him one of these days. His turban, he told them, had been given to him by an African prince as a thank you for getting rid of a troublesome zombie. But they weren't sure they believed this story. For one thing, when asked how Quirrell had fought off the zombie, Quirrell went pink and started talking about the weather. For another, they had noticed that a funny smell hung around the turban and that it probably was stuffed full of garlic as well, so that Quirrell was protected wherever he went. Harry was very relieved to find out that he wasn't miles behind everyone else. There was so much to learn that even people like Draco didn't have much of a head start. Friday, Harry and Draco went down to the Great Hall for breakfast. "We have double potions today with the Gryffindors," said Draco. "Snape will favor us over them," he continued, smugly. Just then, the mail arrived. Harry had gotten used to this by now, but it had given him a bit of a shock on the first morning when about 100 owls had suddenly streamed into the Great Hall during breakfast, circling the tables until they saw their owner and dropping letters and packages onto their laps. Hedwig hadn't brought Harry anything so far. She sometimes flew in to nibble his ear and have a bit of toast before going off to sleep in the Ollery with the other school owls. This morning, however, she fluttered down between the marmalade and the sugar bowl and dropped a note onto Harry's plate. Harry tore it open at once. It said, in a very untidy scrawl, Dear Harry, I know you get Friday afternoons off, so would you like to come and have a cup of tea with me around 3? I want to hear all about your first week. Send us an answer back with Hedwig. Hagrid. Harry borrowed Draco's quill, scribbled yes, please, see you later on the back of the note, and sent Hedwig off again. It was lucky that Harry had tea with Hagrid to look forward to, because the potions lesson was among the worst things that had happened to him this week. At the start of term banquet, Harry had gotten the idea that Professor Snape disliked him. By the end of the first potions lesson, he knew this to be true. Potions lessons took place down in one of the dungeons. It was colder here than up in the main castle, and would have been quite creepy enough without the pickled animals floating in glass jars all around the walls. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the roll call, and like Flitwick, he paused at Harry's name. "Ah, yes," he said softly, "Harry Potter." He glanced up when he said Harry's name. His eyes were black like Hagrid's, but they had none of Hagrid's warmth. They were cold and empty and made you think of dark tunnels. He finished the roll and then began to speak. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. Like Professor McGonagall, Snape had the gift of keeping a class silent without effort. As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have teach. More silence followed this little speech. Harry and Draco exchanged looks. Draco's expression showed that he approved of Professor Snape. Harry could not say the same. "Potter," said Snape suddenly, "what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Powdered root of what to an infusion of what? Harry glanced at Draco, who avoided his eyes. The Gryffindor girl, Hermione Granger's hand shot up into the air. "I don't know, sir," said Harry. Snape's lip curled into a sneer, and he ignored Hermione's hand. "Let us try again. Potter, where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" Hermione stretched her hand as high into the air as it would go without her leaving her seat, but Harry didn't have the faintest idea what a bezoar was. "I don't know, sir." Clearly, Harry forced himself to keep looking straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his books of the Dursleys, but did Snape expect him to remember everything in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi? Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. "What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane?" At this, Hermione stood up, her hand stretching toward the dungeon ceiling. "I don't know," said Harry quietly. "I think you should ask her." He pointed at the bouncing Gryffindor girl. A few people laughed. Harry caught Malvora's eye, and she gave him a thumbs up. Snape did not look incredibly pleased, but at this point, he turned his attention away from Harry. Asphodel and wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the Draught of Living Death. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most poisons. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they're the same plant, which also goes by the name of aconite. Well, why aren't you all copying that down? There was a sudden rummaging for quills and parchment. Over the noise, Snape said, "And I'd like to speak with you after class, Potter." Snape put them all into pairs and set them to mixing up a simple potion to cure boils. He swept around in his long black cloak, watching them weigh dried nettles and crush snake fangs, criticizing almost everyone except Draco, whom he seemed to like. He was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Draco had stewed his horned slugs when clouds of acid green smoke and a loud hissing filled the dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt another Gryffindor's cauldron into a twisted blob, and their potion was seeping across the stone floor, burning holes in people's shoes. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on their stools while Neville, who had been drenched in the potion when the cauldron collapsed, moaned in pain as angry red boils sprang up all over his arms and legs. "Idiot boy," snarled Snape, clearing the spilled potion away with one wave of his wand. "I suppose you added the porcupine quills before taking the cauldron off the fire?" Neville whimpered as boils started to pop all over his nose. Take him up to the hospital wing. Snape spat at Neville's partner. When potions ended, Harry told Draco he'd be outside in a minute, and he waited glumly for the other students to leave him with Snape. After the door shut behind the last student, Harry stood facing Snape, whose arms were folded and who seemed to be glaring rather cruelly at Harry. You were lucky to be in my house, Potter, or you would not have gotten away with your cheek so easily. Harry looked at the ground. Sorry, sir, Harry mumbled, finding the situation extremely unfair. I would regret taking points away from my own house, so you would be wise to behave in my classroom, Potter. You might also consider reading the material you purchased for potions at some point. Harry almost argued with this, about to point out that he had read the book, but he thought better of it. Is that all, sir? Harry asked gloomily. Snape sneered at him, as if about to say something more, but then turned. Yes, he drawled, that is all, Potter. Harry didn't waste his time leaving. What was that all about? Draco asked later as they ascended from the dungeon. Snape says he'll take points away from Slytherin if I'm cheeky again, said Harry. Odd, Draco said. It's unlike him to pick on Slytherins. What did you do? Trip it down the stairs or something? I didn't do anything, Harry cried. Relax, Draco laughed. You were probably just unlucky today. He likes me well enough, he stated. He's bound to warm up to you too. Harry wasn't so sure, but didn't argue. I'm going to Hagrid's at 3, he said. Why on earth would you want to see that beast of a man? Draco gasped, sounding revolted. Harry crossed his arms indignantly. Hagrid's a friend. I was going to invite you to come along, but if you'd rather play wizard chess with Crabbe and Goyle, that's fine. This was a very ironic thing to say, as Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle were not clever enough to play wizard chess. They were much better at games like Trip the Gryffindor or beat each other senseless. Draco thought about this for a moment. Father says that Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts, and I shouldn't be around him. There are also rumors that he's a half-giant. It can't be safe to be alone with a creature like that. Harry had had enough of this argument and turned on his heels. I don't care what he is, he's my friend. He began to stride away in a huff. Wait a minute, Potter, Draco called, running to catch up. I'll go with you to the mongrel's house just this once, only because I want to see what the attraction is. I don't care whether you come or not, but if you say another word about Hagrid. At 5 to 3, they left the castle and made their way across the grounds. Hagrid lived in a small wooden house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A crossbow and a pair of galoshes were outside the front door. Draco muttered something incomprehensible, and Harry knocked on the door. There was a frantic scrabbling from inside and several booming barks. Draco leapt at least 5 feet back from the door. Then Hagrid's voice ran out, saying, "Back, Fong, back." Hagrid's big, hairy face appeared in the crack as he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fong." "I'm not going in there with that thing," Draco hissed. "Hagrid, maybe you should put, Fong, outside while we come inside," Harry offered. "What?" Hagrid said as he held the door open with one hand and a great boarhound's collar with the other. "Fong's harmless. Come on now. Can't hold I'm forever." With some convincing from Harry, Draco finally followed him inside. There was only one room. Hams and pheasants were hanging from the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling on the open fare, and in the corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. "Make yourselves at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fong, who bounded straight at Draco and started licking his ears. "Get this mud away from me," Draco howled, attempting to get away. Hagrid was right. Fong was clearly harmless, but this wasn't Draco's concern. He was more worried about Fong ripping his robes or contaminating him than anything else. "This is Draco," Harry told Hagrid, who had thrown a stake to the other side of the room for Fong to get occupied with. "A Malfoy," said Hagrid, while boiling water into a large teapot and putting rock cakes onto a plate. "Forgot you got sorted into Slytherin, Harry." He said this with a tinge of disappointment, as though he had expected Harry to get sorted elsewhere. "Where are my parents sorted, Hagrid?" Harry asked. "Your parents were Gryffindors, both of them. Suppose house isn't all that matters, though. That's what Dumbledore always says, anyway." Harry wondered again if he'd made the right choice when he picked his house. Finding out that his parents were in Gryffindor wasn't easy. He felt somehow like he was betraying them. The rock cakes were shapeless lumps with raisins that almost broke Harry's teeth, but he pretended to be enjoying them. Draco refused to touch anything in Hagrid's hut, including the rock cakes, as they told Hagrid about their first lessons. Fong rested his head on Harry's knee and drooled all over his robes. Better there than near Draco, he supposed. Harry and Draco were delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch that old git. And as fair that cat, Mrs. Norris, I'd like to introduce her to Fong sometime. I know, every time I go up to the school, she follows me everywhere. Can't get rid of her. Sounds like Pansy, Draco commented under his breath. Harry laughed. Draco stood still by the door the whole time they were in Hagrid's hut, but he eventually stopped, nervously watching Fong, and began to regard Hagrid with judging eyes. Harry told Hagrid about Snape's lesson. Hagrid told Harry not to worry about it, that Snape liked hardly any of the students, after which Draco proudly declared that Snape was favorable to him, which received him annoyed looks from both Harry and Hagrid. But Snape doesn't pick on Slytherins, Harry protested. He must really hate me. Rubbish, said Hagrid. Why should he? Yet Harry couldn't help thinking that Hagrid didn't quite meet his eyes when he said that. How's your parents? Hagrid asked Draco. Haven't heard much about Lucius Malfoy in a while. Didn't like him much when he went to Hogwarts. Harry wondered if Hagrid had changed the subject on purpose. While Draco eagerly boasted about all of his father's recent accomplishments, Harry picked up a piece of paper that was lying on the table under the tea cozy. It was a cutting from the Daily Prophet. Gringotts break-in latest. Investigations continue into the break-in at Gringotts on July 31st, widely believed to be the work of dark wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied the same day. But we're not telling you what was in there, so keep your noses out if you know what's good. For you, said a Gringotts spokesgoblin this afternoon. Hagrid, said Harry, that Gringotts break-in happened on my birthday. It might have been happening while we were there. There was no doubt about it. Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read the story again. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied earlier that same day. Hagrid had emptied Vault 713, if you could call it emptying, taking out that grubby little package. Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Draco walked back to the castle for dinner, Harry thought that none of the lessons so far had given him as much to think about as tea with Hagrid. Had Hagrid collected the package just in time? Where was it now? And did Hagrid know something about Snape he didn't want to tell Harry? Harry had thought that Draco was exaggerating about Gryffindor behavior, but as time went by, Harry was beginning to find that he really didn't like them at all. Sure, Slytherin had done their fair share of damage to Gryffindor pride, having won the House Cup each year for the past 6 years, along with flattening the Gryffindors in Quidditch the year before, but it hardly seemed a good reason for all the hard feelings. Harry had hoped to stay out of the squabble between the two houses, but upon having numerous pranks pulled on him by the Weasley twins, along with getting yelled at by Lavender Brown when he accidentally bumped into her in the hall, he was starting to dislike the house as a whole. Still, first-year Slytherins only had potions with the Gryffindors, so they didn't have to put up with the petty arguments as much. Or at least, they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned up in the Slytherin common room that made them all sneer. Flying lessons would be starting on Thursday, and Gryffindor and Slytherin would be learning together. Typical, said Harry darkly. Just what I always wanted. To make a fool of myself on a broomstick in front of the Gryffindors. He had been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. Don't make me laugh, said Draco. Most of them have never even touched a broomstick, let alone ridden one. Just watch me and you'll pick up flying easy. Draco talked about flying a lot. He complained loudly about first years never getting on the house Quidditch teams and told long, boastful stories that always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. Harry was beginning to wonder if it wasn't all just talk. Draco wasn't the only one, though. Blaise Zabini said he'd crashed into a window after chasing down a remote-controlled airplane when he was only 5. Even Millicent Bulstrode said she'd been riding a broom since she was 2. Everyone from wizarding families talked about Quidditch constantly. Malvora had never been on a broomstick because she said she preferred dragons. Not that she'd ever ridden a dragon. She was just convinced that they would be much more entertaining. Pansy had ridden a broomstick once, and it had messed up her hair, so she hadn't ridden one since. Crab and Goyle had both ridden broomsticks as well, though it was a particularly difficult task for them because of their size, and all of their stories seemed to end in the broomstick breaking. Harry had had enough of the Quidditch talk and was very relieved by the arrival of the mail at breakfast on Thursday. Harry hadn't had a single letter since Hagrid's note, whereas Draco seemed to receive one every day with packages of sweets from home. He didn't mind sharing with Harry, since he was sure his parents would just send more the next day. In fact, Draco's eagle owl simply began to show up with 2 packages of sweets, one which was intended for Harry. Though Harry was uncomfortable with this at first, it did seem to work out for the best, since Draco couldn't hog all the good candies for himself, and he assured Harry that it was no bother to his parents to spoil them both in order to keep their son happy. At the Gryffindor table, a barn owl brought Neville a small package. Harry and Draco were on their way out of the Great Hall and passed the table just in time to hear Neville say, "It's a remembrall. Gran knows I forget things. This tells you if there's something you've forgotten to do. Look, you hold it tight like this, and if it turns red, oh." His face fell because the remembrall had suddenly glowed scarlet. "You've forgotten something?" Draco nudged Harry in the ribs and smirked. Before Harry had a chance to even guess what he was up to, he'd snatched the remembrall out of Neville's hand. The youngest Weasley stood up immediately. "Drop it, Draco," Harry warned. He didn't want to be involved in one of these fights. "What's going on?" It was Professor McGonagall. "Malfoy's got my remembrall, Professor." Scowling, Draco quickly dropped the remembrall back on the table. "Just looking," he said, and he sloped away with Harry behind him. "Sorry," Harry apologized quickly to Neville as he walked by. "Why'd you do a thing like that?" he snapped at Draco as soon as they were out of hearing distance. "For a laugh, of course," said Draco. "That Longbottom has the brain of a gnome." Draco was quite impressed by his own humor, for he laughed boisterously after saying this. "It wasn't funny," Harry said, eyes narrowed. "It was just a joke," Draco shot back. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you were siding with a Gryffindor." "I'm not siding with anyone," shouted Harry. "I don't think you should pick fights with them, especially with someone as defenseless as Neville." Draco could hardly believe someone was standing up to him as boldly as this. "Just what's your problem, Potter?" "At the moment, you are." Harry spat. A silence followed. Draco's face was twisted into a perplexed sneer, and Harry was glaring back at him, fiercely. It was Draco who finally turned his gaze away. "You got some nerve, Potter," he said in a low voice. "Fine. I'll leave Longbottom alone, but this doesn't mean I'm soft or I like any of those Gryffindors. Got it?" "I don't care if you hate every one of them," said Harry. "Just don't go around picking on people like Neville." The conversation was dropped there. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry, Draco, and the other Slytherins hurried down the front steps onto the grounds for their first flying lesson. It was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns toward a smooth, flat lawn on the opposite side of the grounds to the Forbidden Forest, whose trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Gryffindors arrived shortly, and so did their teacher, Madame Hooch. She had short, gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. "Well, what are you all waiting for?" she barked. "Everyone stand by a broomstick. Come on, hurry up." Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some of the twigs stuck out at odd angles. "Stick out your right hand over your broom," called Madame Hooch at the front, "and say up, up," everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, but it was one of the few that did. Pansy's broom sort of flopped. Hermione Granger's broom simply rolled over, and Malvora's hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There was a quaver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madame Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off the end and walked up and down the rows correcting their grips. Draco was quite shocked to hear that he'd been doing it wrong for years. "Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off on the ground hard," said Madame Hooch. "Keep your brooms steady, rise a few feet, and then come straight back down by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle, 3 2-inch. But Neville, nervous and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had touched Madame Hooch's lips. "Come back, boy," she shouted, but Neville was rising straight up like a cork shot out of a bottle, 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his scared white face look down at the ground falling away, saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and wham, a thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still rising higher and higher, and started to drift lazily toward the forbidden forest and out of sight. Madame Hooch was bending over Neville, her face as white as his. "Broken wrist," Harry heard her mutter. "Come on, boy, it's all right, up you get." She turned to the rest of the class. "None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear." Neville, his face tear-streaked, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madame Hooch, who had her arm around him. Draco made a face, as if he wanted badly to make fun of Neville, but he looked at Harry and saved his breath. Then, an excited and mischievous expression filled his face. He got onto his broomstick. "Well then, Harry," said Draco, "I promised I'd teach you a thing or two about flying, didn't I?" Harry looked around uncertainly. They had been told, and rather directly, not to touch their brooms. "What's wrong, afraid are you?" Draco's broom hovered into the air. "Don't want to accept the challenge?" "Go on, Harry," called Malvora. "Race him." The other Slytherins joined in immediately. Everyone was always ready to see a good showdown. They seemed rather intent on watching the two of them race. Harry thought about it for a moment more, and then mounted his broomstick. "No, Shouty de Hermione Granger. Madame Hooch told us not to move. You'll get us all in trouble." Harry ignored her. He kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared. Air brushed through his hair, and his robes whipped out behind him, and in a rush of fierce joy, he realized he'd found something he could do without being taught. This was easy, this was wonderful. He pulled his broomstick up a little to take it even higher, and heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Draco, who looked stunned. "Don't just sit there," Harry called. "I thought we were going to race." Draco grinned and, without warning, shot past Harry like a javelin. Harry turned and leaned forward and grasped the broom tightly in both hands and went straight after him. Draco glanced behind him and looked worried to see Harry closing the space between them. He dived down, unexpectedly, and changed direction. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. "Malfoy," Goyle called as Draco and Harry sped toward them. "Look what I found." It was Neville's Remembrall. It must have fallen when he was flying. Goyle threw it hard into the air toward Draco, who darted to take hold of it. He hovered on his broomstick for a moment, staring at the glittering ball. "What's up the stakes, Potter?" asked Draco, holding the ball out. "Put it down, Draco," Harry said. "You'll break it." "See if you can catch me then." He took off again, faster than before. Harry flew as fast as he could, desperate to prove himself and to get the Remembrall from Draco. He was catching up fast and was almost close enough to touch the hem of Draco's robes when a young Malfoy turned to look behind him. He clearly hadn't been expecting Harry to be so close, for he slipped, and in his struggle to grasp the broomstick again, he dropped the Remembrall. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, the ball start to fall. He leaned forward and pointed his broom handle down. Next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing the ball. Wind whistled in his ears, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out his hand. A foot from the ground, he caught it, just in time to pull his broom straight, and he toppled gently onto the grass with the Remembrall. Harry Potter! His heart sank faster than he'd just dived. Professor McGonagall was running toward them. He got his feet, trembling. "Never, in all my time at Hogwarts." Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock, and her glasses flashed furiously. "How dare you? Might have broken your neck. Potter, follow me now." Harry almost argued that Draco had started it, but decided against it. He walked numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strode toward the castle. He was going to be expelled, he just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to keep up. Now he'd done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. What would the Dursleys say when he turned up on the doorstep? Up the front steps and down a staircase she went. She wrenched open doors and marched along corridors with Harry trotting miserably behind her. He suddenly realized, with a sense of impending doom, where she was taking him. Professor McGonagall stopped outside of Snape's classroom. She opened the door and poked her head inside. "Excuse me, Professor Snape, but could I borrow you and Marcus Flint for a moment?" Harry had no idea what was going on, but he knew that Snape would not be pleased to see him. Professor Snape walked out with a tall, dark-haired Slytherin boy. Snape already looked irritated to have been interrupted in class, but when he saw Harry, his irritation turned quickly into something more venomous. "Professor McGonagall," he seethed, "what's the occasion?" "Potter disobeyed the rules in Madam Hooch's class and very nearly got himself killed," Professor McGonagall said. "I thought, as head of his house, you should be the one to decide on his punishment." "Great," thought Harry. "He'd be expelled for sure. But before you make your final decision, I would like to put in another word. That is why I had you bring Flint out." Harry had no idea what was going on, but the feeling was returning to his legs. "Was that your first time on a broomstick, Potter?" Harry nodded silently. He caught a remembrall at a 50-foot dive, Professor McGonagall told Snape. "Didn't even scratch himself. Charlie Weasley couldn't have done it." Snape narrowed his eyes. "And your point being?" he said. "My point being, before you decide to punish Potter, you might consider him for your Quidditch team. Of course, it would be Flint's final say, but it is something for you to think about as well, Professor Snape." Marcus Flint seemed to be sizing Harry up. "He's got a seeker's build," said Flint, walking around Harry and staring at him. "If he's as good as she says, we could use him. Wouldn't want to drop our winning streak to Gryffindor this year." "Indeed," Professor McGonagall said through narrowed eyes. "If that is all, then my business here is done." She turned and left as quickly as she had come. Snape was very still. "We do not typically allow first years on the Quidditch teams, Potter," he said, "and there is still the matter of your punishment." "Professor," Marcus Flint interrupted, "with all due respect, I wouldn't mind taking Potter out for a test run myself. I could see how he works with the balls. And if he's that good dash." "Yes, I understand," Snape snapped. He rounded on Harry at once, his eyes accusing. "Potter, if you're not the best seeker that Slytherin has ever seen, I will be sure to do more than take 10 points from you. Be sure of that. If you're not capable of keeping up your classwork and training, I will snatch you down from your broomstick and pile on you enough detention to make the Weasley twins cringe. And there will be no more disobedience to your teachers as long as you are in my house. Do you understand, Potter?" Harry could hardly believe all that had just happened, let alone speak. Instead, he nodded. Snape didn't say another word. He swooped around, robes billowing, and returned to his classroom, slamming the door behind him. "So where did the old bat take you?" It was dinner time. Harry had just met up with Draco, whose first move was, of course, to ask about what had happened when he'd left the ground with Professor McGonagall. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. He knew Draco wouldn't be happy to hear about Harry making it onto the Quidditch team, especially when Draco was so set on being on the team himself. It was all he ever seemed to talk about. "She took me straight to Snape," said Harry evasively. "That's not so bad," Draco said. "What did he do?" "He took 10 points from Slytherin." "That's nothing for how McGonagall dragged you out of the field," said Draco. "She made a big deal of it, and you only lost 10 points? No distinction." Harry swallowed a large chunk of pie. "Well, no," he said, slowly, but she wanted to talk to Marcus Flint as well. He knew this was going to end badly. "Marcus Flint?" asked Draco. "The Quidditch captain? But why would she want to speak to him?" Draco's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Apparently," said Harry, "she was really impressed by my flying, and she suggested that Snape let Flint put me on the team as seeker." Draco's expression was unreadable. "And did he asked quietly. "Did Snape let Flint put you on the team?" Harry looked down and gave a brief nod. A long silence followed. "I'm sorry, Draco," said Harry. "I had no idea, Dash." "Oh, I'm sure, Potter," Draco snapped. "You just hated being told that you were going to be seeker, didn't you? You know, I was the one that got you into the air. You'd never even touched a broomstick." A few Slytherins were beginning to look. Draco, I'm sure if McGonagall had seen you, Harry pleaded, she would have done the same dash. But she didn't see me, did she? He seethed. She was too busy looking at the famous Harry Potter. It's not like that at all, Harry shouted. Now the Slytherins weren't the only ones watching. You just love all the attention, don't you, Potter? Can't go a day without someone noticing you. As selfish as they come. Look who's being selfish. Harry felt that this entire argument was extremely unfair. Draco hadn't even taken a moment to be happy for Harry's achievement. Instead, he'd changed the subject right back to himself. What happened next was very fast. Harry stood up, not to fight, but to walk away. But this action was interpreted differently by Crabbe and Goyle, who stood up immediately at Draco's defense. Before Harry had the time to respond, Professor Snape loomed over all of them, glaring. Just what do you think you're doing, Potter? He snapped. Harry glared at Draco as hard as he could. Leaving, said Harry. To his great relief, Snape did not pursue him as he left the Great Hall. It had certainly not been a perfect day, Harry thought, as he lay awake much later, listening to Crabbe snore. Earlier, when he was in the common room, he'd seen Malvora and Draco whispering to each other near the fireplace. He'd also gotten curious, sometimes angry, looks from other classmates. He had been very ready to go to sleep, but was simply too fed up to doze off. He kept on thinking about Draco's sneering face. Just one bed over, combined with Crabbe's snores, it was nearly driving him mad. At last, just when he seemed to be drifting off, he heard someone get out of bed. Harry listened carefully and tried to make out the figure in the dark. It was definitely Draco. Unable to contain his curiosity, Harry waited until Draco was out of the room and silently slipped out of bed to follow him. Up, Harry went and into the common room. The fire was out, and the only light came from a moonlight that filtered into the lake outside the windows. Harry waited at the top of the stairs to see if he could make out Draco in the dark. He caught a glimpse of him just in time to see him leave the passageway into the dungeon corridors. Harry paused before following him. There was a very good chance he was going to get caught by Filch or Mrs. Norris, and he felt like he was pushing his luck, breaking another school rule today. On the other hand, he couldn't stop thinking about his argument with Draco, and who knew what he might be up to, roaming the castle at night. He followed Draco as he flitted along corridors striped with bars of moonlight from the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to see him run into Filch or Mrs. Norris, but they were lucky. Draco was climbing the levels of the castle and sped up a staircase to the third floor, where the trophy room was. Luckily, Draco didn't close the door all the way, and Harry was able to listen through the crack, though he was worried about standing in the open corridor. Filch could show up at any second. Of course, I'm sure, a voice whispered. It sounded like Malvora. What makes you think it will work? Draco's voice responded, heavy with skepticism. Just shut up and trust me, Malvora snapped. You want to get on the team, don't you? You want to show up, Potter? A moment of silence. Let's hear it then, said Draco. Harry leaned closer to the door. Quidditch tryouts are in 2 days, said Malvora. All you have to do is try out Dash. First years aren't allowed on the teams, Draco interrupted. Unless it's Potter, of course. That's why you charm Flint before you try out. Harry thought he heard something down the hall. He jerked to look, but there was nothing. With his nerves even more jittery, he listened again to the door. I know a charm, said Malvora, called Inspiratum Motivus. It makes whoever you cast it to be inspired by you. It only works on people, trolls, ogres, and giants, and it could work anywhere from 2 minutes to 2 hours, but it's the best I have. That's rather unreliable, wouldn't you say? If you've got something better, knock yourself out. More silence. Teach me the charm, said Draco. Not so fast, Malvora hissed. I want something in return. Another catch, Draco groaned. Malvora whispered something, and Harry struggled to hear what she was saying. He pushed the door open just a little bit more. You're mad, Draco accused. Can't your parents get you something like that? No, Malvora said simply. Do we have a deal? Silence. Fine, Draco spot. Harry tried to move back from the door as quickly as possible, knowing that whatever business Malvora and Draco had conducted was over. As he stepped back, however, he heard a low meow from near his feet. It was Malvora's cat. "Sit," said Malvora. "Someone's here." The door was flung open and Harry fell forward. He picked himself up and faced Draco and Malvora. "Well, well, Potter," Draco hissed, eavesdropping. Before Harry could respond, he heard someone speak. "What's wrong, my sweet? Smell children lurking about." It was Filch speaking to Mrs. Norris. Horror-struck, Harry waved madly at the other two to follow him as quickly as possible. They scurried silently down hall, away from Filch's voice. Draco's robes had barely whipped round the corner when they heard Filch enter the trophy room. "This way," Harry mouthed to the others, and, petrified, they began to creep down a long gallery full of suits of armor. They could hear Filch getting nearer. Malvora's cat, Camo, suddenly leaped onto one of the suits of armor. Malvora lunged to grab him, but tripped, toppling the suit right over. The clanging and crashing were enough to wake the whole castle. "Run!" Harry yelled, and the three of them sprinted down the gallery. Not looking back to see whether Filch was following, they swung around the doorpost and galloped down one corridor, then another, Harry in the lead. Without any idea where they were or where they were going, they ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtled along it, and came out near their charms classroom, which they knew was miles from the trophy room. "Your stupid cat could have gotten us killed," Draco panted, pointing at Malvora. "He's not stupid," she gasped, clutching the cat so hard against her chest that his ribs might break. "We've got to get back to the dungeons," said Harry, quickly. "What makes you think we'll go with you, Potter?" Draco challenged. "I'll find my own way back." "Splitting up isn't a bad idea," said Malvora. "At least that way, if one of us gets caught, the other two don't." "That's that," said Draco, who turned in the other direction. It wasn't going to be that simple. He hadn't gone more than 3 paces when a doorknob rattled, and something came shooting out of a classroom in front of him. It was Peeves. He caught sight of the 3 of them and gave a squeal of delight. "Shut up, Peeves. Please, you'll get us thrown out." Peeves cackled. "Wandering around at midnight, ickle first eyes? Toot, toot, toot. Naughty, naughty, you'll get caughty." "Not if you don't give us away, Peeves, please." "Should tell Filch." "I should," said Peeves in a saintly voice, but his eyes glittered wickedly. "It's for your own good, you know." "Run," Malvora called. "Students out of bed," Peeves bellowed. "Students out of bed down the charms corridor." Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives, right to the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door, and it was locked. "I knew I shouldn't have followed you, Potter," Draco cried, as they pushed helplessly at the door. "I won't be able to explain this one to Father." They could hear footsteps, Filch running as fast as he could toward Peeves' shouts. "Shut up," Malvora hissed. She jammed something into the keyhole and wiggled it. The lock clicked and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. "Which way do they go, Peeves?" Filch was saying. "Quick, tell me." "Say please." "Don't mess with me." "Peeves, now where did they go?" "Shan't say nothing if you don't say please," said Peeves in his annoying sing-song voice. "All right, please." "Nothing." Told you I wouldn't say nothing if you didn't say please." Hiya." And they heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Filch cursing in rage. "He thinks this door is locked," Harry whispered. "I think we'll be okay." "Think again." "What?" Harry turned around and saw, quite clearly, what. For a moment, he was sure he'd walked into a nightmare. This was too much, on top of everything that had happened so far. They weren't in a room, as he had supposed. They were in a corridor, the forbidden corridor on the 3rd floor. And now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog, a dog that filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling, mad eyes, 3 noses twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes from yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them. And Harry knew the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise. But it was quickly getting over that. There was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry groped for the doorknob. Between Filch and death, he'd take Filch. They fell backward, Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran. They almost flew back down the corridor. Filch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else, because they didn't see him anywhere, but they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the stone wall that hid the Slytherin common room in the dungeons. Tooth and nail, panted Harry, and the wall opened. They scrambled into the common room and collapsed, trembling, onto the couches. It was a while before any of them said anything. "It can't be legal to keep that thing in a school," said Draco, who was shaking the most. "When my father hears about this..." "He won't hear about it," Harry snapped. "Do you expect him to be happy that you were running around the castle at night?" Draco glared at Harry and didn't say anything. Harry was busy trying to figure out why on earth the monster was in the school to begin with. "Stunning," Malvora whispered. "What do you mean, stunning?" Draco snarled, terror still in his eyes. "It had remarkable claws, like that of the Styxian dragon," she said thoughtfully. "Why on earth were you staring at its claws?" "To get a better look at the trapdoor," she said simply. She stood up, still holding her cat, which, Harry noticed, was quite still. "Don't worry about him. I used a sleeping spell after the trophy room, and, Malfoy, I'll teach you that charm later." With these words, she vanished into the girl dormitories. "Are you going to tell on me if I charm Marcus Flint?" Draco asked after watching Malvora walk away. "No," Harry sighed. "I don't really care." At the moment, it couldn't have been truer. Malvora had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. There was a trapdoor, which meant the dog was guarding something. What had Hagrid said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except perhaps Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where the grubby little package from Vault 713 was. Draco and Harry didn't argue the next day. Meeting the three-headed dog seemed to be enough to keep the tensions at bay. Draco liked to pretend that he was far less frightened by the dog than he really was, and quite enjoyed talking about the sort of trouble Dumbledore would get in if the Ministry of Magic knew about what lurked in one of Hogwarts' corridors. Harry filled Draco in about the package that seemed to have been moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts, and they spent a lot of time wondering what could possibly need such heavy protection. "It's likely a very powerful dark artifact," said Draco, as if he knew a lot about dark artifacts. But all they knew for sure about the mysterious object was that it was about 2 inches long. They didn't have much chance of guessing what it was without further clues. Malvora hadn't talked to Harry or Draco since the incident, but this wasn't unusual. Slytherins didn't spend too much time together, typically, especially not someone like Malvora, who was much more interested in sketching drawings of the three-headed dog than actually talking about it. About a week went by, and the three-headed dog fell into the back of their minds, and Quidditch was brought right into the front when they saw a notice posted in the Slytherin common room after breakfast, declaring the Quidditch team tryouts. There were 3 slots open, 2 for chasers and 1 for a beater, but not for a seeker. Harry didn't say anything to Draco about it, fearing another argument. "About to be a chaser, at least," is all Draco muttered. "Potter," a voice called. It was Marcus Flint, who was passing through the common room on his way out to the Quidditch field. "Why don't you come with me, and I can test you out before I close your position permanently?" Harry looked at Draco, who was carefully avoiding his eyes, and then nodded. They left the castle and set off toward the Quidditch field. He'd never been inside the stadium before. Hundreds of seats were raised in stands around the field so that the spectators were high enough to see what was going on. At either end of the field were 3 golden poles with hoops on the end. They reminded Harry of the little plastic sticks muffled children blew bubbles through, except that they were 50 feet high. Marcus Flint carried a large wooden crate under one arm and a broomstick under the other. "We don't have much time," he said, "so I'll go through this quickly. Quidditch is easy to understand. 7 players on each side, 14 total. 3 of the 7 are chasers." 3 chasers, Harry repeated, as Flint took out a bright red ball about the size of a soccer ball. "This is the quaffle," said Flint. "The chasers try to get points by throwing the ball through the hoop. Each goal is worth 10 points. Got it?" "The chasers throw the quaffle and put through the hoops to score," Harry recited. "So, that's sort of like basketball on broomsticks with 6 hoops, isn't it?" "Basketball," Flint said with an eyebrow raised. Never mind, said Harry quickly. Then, there are the keepers. One for each side. They try to keep the other team from scoring. 3 chasers, 1 keeper, said Harry, who was determined to remember it all. And they play with the quaffle. Okay, got that. So what are they for? He pointed at the 3 balls left inside the box. In response, Flint handed Harry a small club, a bit like a short baseball bat. Bludgers, said Flint. He showed Harry 2 identical balls, jet black and slightly smaller than a red quaffle. Harry noticed that they seemed to be straining to escape the straps holding them inside the box. Be ready, Flint said. He bent down and freed one of the bludgers. At once, the black ball rose high in the air and then pelted straight at Harry's face. Harry swung at it with the bat to stop it from breaking his nose and sent it zigzagging away into the air. It zoomed around their heads and then shot at Flint, who jumped on it and pinned it to the ground. He forced the struggling bludger back into the crate and strapped it safely. Bludgers try to knock players off their brooms. So we have 2 beaters on each team to protect their side from the bludgers and try to knock them toward the other team. Got it. 3 chasers try and score with the quaffle. The keeper guards the goal posts. The beaters keep the bludgers away from their team. Harry reeled off. Flint nodded. Air, have the bludgers ever killed anyone? Harry asked, hoping he sounded offhand. Not here, mostly broken bones. Now the last member of the team is the Seeker, who doesn't have to worry about the quaffle or bludgers. Unless they crack my head open. The beaters will take care of that. Flint reached into the crate and took out the 4th and last ball. Compared with the quaffle and the bludgers, it was tiny, about the size of a large walnut. It was bright gold and had little fluttering silver wings. This is the golden snitch. It's fast and difficult to see, but it's also what the whole game depends on. It's your job to catch it. You got to be faster than not only the snitch, but the beaters and the bludgers, and you have to be able to weave in between everyone else. You want to get it before the other team Seeker, because whichever Seeker catches the snitch wins his team an extra 150 points. On top of that, a game of Quidditch only ends when the snitch is caught. The longest game on record is 3 months. They had to keep bringing on substitutes so the players could get some sleep. And that's the game of Quidditch. Harry nodded. He understood what he had to do all right. It was doing it that was going to be the problem. Now let's test out your flying. He put the snitch away and pulled a bag of ordinary golf balls out of his pocket, and a few minutes later, he and Harry were up in the air, Flint throwing the golf balls as hard as he could in every direction for Harry to catch. Harry didn't miss a single one, and Flint approved. After half an hour, he finally landed. We'll be sure to win the cup again this year, Flint grinned, as long as the tryouts aren't a total flop. He scowled and checked his watch. Speaking of which, it's almost time. Could I stay and watch? Harry asked. Don't see why not, said Flint. Harry waited in the stands for the tryouts to begin. A handful of people showed up to try out and a few other spectators as well. Malvora, Pansy, Crabbe, and Goyle were among them. Malvora came to sit beside Harry, and they watched as the competitors were suited up. Draco was there, and when he stood with the 6 other competitors, he looked incredibly tiny. He wants to show you up pretty badly, Malvora commented. And boast about it, thought Harry. Did you show him the charm? Asked Harry. Yes, she said, but he owes me. Adrian Pusey was trying out to be a chaser and was currently being timed on how quickly he could throw the quaffle through the 3 hoops. If you don't mind my asking, said Harry, what does he owe you? A coat made from the feathers of an Athenian dragon, she replied, in the matter-of-fact way in which she spoke. A fur coat didn't seem like too much to ask, so Harry assumed it must be extremely valuable. Before he had a chance to ask, though, Draco was called to try out next. Harry watched closely as Draco reached into a crate to grab a broomstick. He was hunched over for quite some time. To spectators, this may have looked like he was trying to pick out a broom really carefully, but Harry knew better. At last, Draco stood up, broom in hand. When I say go, Flint called, I want you to throw this quaffle into a hoop, catch it, then repeat through both remaining hoops. After that, you will playing against the keeper, got it? Draco nodded, a slight smirk on his face. Go Draco! Pansy shouted from lower in the stands. Well, Malfoy, Crabbe yelled. Draco mounted his broomstick and Flint threw him the quaffle. He caught it and prepared to kick off the ground. "Geo!" yelled Flint. Draco was rather skilled on a broom. He chucked the quaffle through the farthest hoop and darted down toward the ground to catch it as it fell. As soon as he caught it, he swooped around to throw it into the second hoop. "Good," Flint said, eyes wide. "Amazing style." With his confidence boost, Draco sped up even more, capturing the quaffle again and throwing it into the final hoop. "Outstanding," Flint called, as Draco caught the quaffle for the last time and landed. 1 minute 20, slower than Pusey, but your turns were sharp enough to outfly any keeper. "Good job, Draco," screamed Pansy. Next, Draco had to score against the keeper. Flint played this role for now. Draco lost the quaffle twice to Flint and made 3 goals. This was the same score as Morag, the third person trying out for Chaser. "No way he'll let him on the team," said Harry. Morag and Pusey were faster. "Draco's good, but not that good." Just watch," Malvora chided. Flint and Draco landed, and almost as soon as Draco's broom had touched the ground, Flint was patting him on the back. "First years aren't usually allowed on the team," he said, "but there's something about you that makes me think we'll do great this season, even with such young ones. On top of that, it will just give you and Potter more experience, won't it?" "Truly inspiring, Malfoy. You're on." Pansy nearly toppled out of her seat when she heard this. Crabbe and Goyle high-five each other, and Malvora smirked. Harry could hardly believe it. Maybe Draco would stop trying to outdo him now. "Potter, Malfoy," Flint called as Harry and Draco met up to walk back to the castle. "Let's destroy Gryffindor this year." Perhaps it was because he was now so busy, what with Quidditch practice 3 evenings a week on top of all his homework, but Harry could hardly believe it when he realized that he'd already been at Hogwarts 2 months. The castle felt more like home than Privet Drive ever had. His lessons, too, were becoming more and more interesting now that they had mastered the basics. On Halloween morning, they woke to the delicious smell of baking pumpkin wafting through the corridors. Even better, Professor Flitwick announced in Charms that he thought they were ready to start making objects fly, something they had all been dying to try since they'd seen him make a quill zoom around the classroom. Professor Flitwick put the class into pairs to practice. Harry's partner was Blaise Zabini. Draco was to be working with Malvora Melbark, which was unfortunate considering that 2 months had gone by and Draco had still not paid her for teaching him the charm that got him on the Quidditch team. "Now, don't forget that nice wrist movement we've been practicing," squeaked Professor Flitwick, perched on top of his pile of books, as usual. "Swish and flick, remember, swish and flick. And saying the magic words properly is very important, too. Never forget Wizard Baruffio, who said instead of F, and found himself on the floor with a buffalo on his chest." It was very difficult. Harry and Blaise swished and flicked, but the feather they were supposed to be sending skyward just lay on the desktop. Blaise got so impatient that he jabbed the feather with his wand, and it disintegrated. At the next table, Draco and Malvora hadn't even lifted their wands. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to get something like that?" Draco was saying, his feather untouched. "Your parents have the money, don't they?" Malvora asked. "Of course they do, but I'm not mental enough to ask them for something like that," said Draco. "Don't your parents have the money?" "Of course they do, but my parents refuse to spoil me like yours," she shot back at him. The force of her voice caused her feather to waft off the table. It went unnoticed. "Miss Melbark, Mr. Malfoy, I do hope you're at least attempting the spell," Flitwick said, distracting them from their argument temporarily. "Wingardium Leviosa," they said at exactly the same time. The feather didn't move. "If these were Athenan feathers, they would float that much easier," Malvora snapped. "Would you be quiet about that stupid coat?" shouted Draco, slamming his wand on the table. Sparks shot out the end, directly at Malvora. Her clothes caught fire immediately. There were a few seconds of panic, and students watched as Flitwick doused Malvora in water. She looked twice as uncomfortable after the fire was put out, and she was sopping wet. In a huff, she turned and stormed from the classroom, not before giving Draco a rather angry look. Draco was in a very bad mood by the end of the class. "She's bonkers if she really thinks I'll get her that coat," he said to Harry as they pushed their way into the crowded corridor. "You did make a deal with her," Harry pointed out. What's she going to do? Draco sneered. Set her cat on me? Malvora didn't turn up for the next class and wasn't seen all afternoon. Draco didn't say anything about it, but was particularly irritable for the rest of the day. On their way down to the Great Hall for the Halloween feast, Harry and Draco saw Malvora's cat, stalking in the corridor, and no Malvora, but a moment later they had entered the Great Hall, where the Halloween decorations put her out of their minds. 1,000 live bats fluttered from the walls and ceiling, while 1,000 more swooped over the tables in low black clouds, making the candles and the pumpkin stutter. The feast appeared suddenly on the golden plates, as it had at the start of term banquet. Harry was just helping himself to a baked potato when Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall, his turban askew and terror on his face. Everyone stared as he reached Professor Dumbledore's chair, slumped against the table, and gasped, "Troll, in the dungeons, thought you ought to know." He then sank to the floor in a dead faint. There was an uproar. It took several purple firecrackers exploding from the end of Professor Dumbledore's wand to bring silence. "Prefects," he rumbled, "lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." Timothy Orthos, a Slytherin prefect, immediately took action. "Come on, then. Follow me, stick close together. Get out of the way." "How could a troll get in?" Harry asked as they climbed the stairs. "Same way the three-headed dog got in, I imagine," said Draco with a scowl. They passed different groups of people hurrying in different directions. As they jostled their way through a crowd of confused Hufflepuffs, Harry suddenly grabbed Draco's arm. "I've just thought, Malvora." "What about her?" "She doesn't know about the troll." Draco yanked his arm away from Harry. "So what then?" he asked. "You want to play hero and go save her?" "Draco, she could be in real trouble," Harry snapped, not believing what was being said. "Well then, you go and be all noble," said Draco. "As for me, I'm not about to get killed by a troll." "And what about Malvora? You just let her get killed then?" "It would be your fault, you know," Harry accused. "If you had just gotten her the coat, like you said, she'd be here now." Draco paused. He obviously hadn't thought about someone dying on his account. "Fine," he snapped, paler than usual. Ducking down, they joined the Hufflepuffs going the other way, slipped down a deserted side corridor, and hurried off toward the dungeons. They had just turned the corner when they heard quick footsteps behind them. "The troll!" Draco cried, darting behind a large stone griffin. Harry followed and peered around it. Who they saw was not a troll, however, but Snape. He crossed the corridor and disappeared from view. "What's he doing?" Harry whispered. "Why isn't he down in the dungeons with the rest of the teachers?" "What does it matter? Let's just get back to the common room." Before he could finish, Harry was creeping along the corridor after Snape's fading footsteps. "He's heading for the third floor," Harry said. Do you smell that?" Draco groaned. "I've never smelled anything so foul." Harry sniffed, and the disgusting stench reached his nostrils. A mixture of old socks and the kind of public toilet no one seems to clean. And then they heard it, a low grunting and the shuffling footfalls of gigantic feet. Draco whimpered and pointed. At the end of a passage to the left, something huge was moving toward them. Draco darted for the nearest room. Harry followed closely after and shut the door as quickly and quietly as he could behind him. They were inside of the girls' bathroom, and, to their surprise, laying in the corner of the wall opposite, beneath the sinks, was Malvora. "It's killed her," Draco squeaked. "The troll killed her, and it's all my fault. I should have just gotten her the coat." He looked near tears. "Draco, calm down," said Harry, walking over to her. "She's not dead. She's just—" Malvora rubbed her eyes and sat up with a yawn. "Asleep." Draco slumped against the wall in relief. Malvora yawned. "Oi, what are you doing in the girls' bathroom?" The answer came in the form of a loud crash as the troll smashed the door open. Draco clutched the wall, pale as the Bloody Baron, and Malvora jumped to her feet. The troll was entering. It was a horrible sight. 12 feet tall, its skin was a dull, granite gray, its great lumpy body like a boulder with its small bald head perched on top like a coconut. It had short legs thick as tree trunks with flat, horny feet. The smell coming from it was incredible. It was holding a huge wooden club, which dragged along the floor because its arms were so long. Its ears twitched, and it began to advance on them. They had nowhere to run, and Draco began to wail. The troll's ears twitched again, and it turned to lumber toward Draco's cries. "Confuse it," Harry said desperately, and, seizing a tap, he threw it as hard as he could against the wall. The troll stopped and looked around, blinking stupidly, to see what had made the noise. Its mean little eyes saw Harry. It hesitated, then made for him instead, lifting its club as it went. Malvora ducked past it and stood behind it, her arms flailing. "Over here," she yelled. The troll paused again, turning its ugly snout toward her instead, giving Harry time to run around it. "Come on, Draco," Harry yelled, trying to pull Draco toward the door, but he couldn't move. He was still flat against the wall, lips quivering in terror. The shouting and the echoes seemed to be driving the troll berserk. It roared again and started toward Malvora, who was nearest. Harry then did something that was both very brave and very stupid. He took a great running jump and managed to fasten his arms around the troll's neck from behind. The troll couldn't feel Harry banging there, but even a troll will notice if you stick a long bit of wood up its nose, and Harry's wand had still been in his hand when he jumped. It had gone straight up one of the troll's nostrils. Howling with pain, the troll twisted and flailed its club, with Harry clinging on for dear life. Any second, the troll was going to rip him off or catch him a terrible blow with the club. Draco had sunk to the floor in fright. Malvora pulled out her own wand. Not knowing what she was going to do, she heard herself cry out the first spell that came in her head, Wingardium Leviosa. The club flew suddenly out of the troll's hand, rose high up into the air, turned slowly over, and dropped, with a sickening crack, onto its owner's head. The troll swayed on the spot and then fell flat on its face, with a thud that made the whole room tremble. Harry got to his feet. He was shaking and out of breath. Malvora had dropped her wand and was now gaping at what she had done. "Why, you killed it," Draco whispered. "I don't think so," said Harry. "I think it's just been knocked out." He bent down and pulled his wand out of the troll's nose. It was covered in what looked like lumpy gray glue. "Ugh, troll boogers." He wiped on the troll's trousers. A sudden slamming and loud footsteps made the three of them look up. They hadn't realized what a racket they had been making, but of course someone downstairs must have heard the crashes and the troll's roars. A moment later, Professor McGonagall had come bursting into the room, closely followed by Snape, with Quirrell bringing up the rear. Quirrell took one look at the troll, let out a faint whimper, and sat quickly down on a toilet, clutching his heart. Snape bent over the troll. Professor McGonagall was looking at Harry and Draco. Harry had never seen her look so angry. Her lips were white. "What on earth were you thinking of?" said Professor McGonagall, with cold fury in her voice. Harry looked over at Draco, who was still slumped against the wall. "You're lucky you weren't killed. Why aren't you in your dormitory?" Snape gave Harry a swift, piercing look. "A fair question," he said. "Well, you can't have expected us all to get to the dormitories in this chaos," Malvora suddenly said. "With everyone running round, it's no wonder we got lost. It's not like we were out looking for a giant troll." Harry and Draco both looked at her. "You'd think we'd get some thanks for killing it," she said, rather cheekily. Harry stuck his wand up its nose, and I knocked it out with its own club. And Draco, well, he was a good enough distraction for it. "Miss Melbark, hold your tongue," Professor McGonagall snapped. 10 points from Slytherin for that. "I believe, Minerva," Snape intervened, "that I can hand out punishment to my students alone." He looked at the three of them, expressionlessly. Though, most of what occurred here appears to be dumb luck. It takes some brains to fight a mountain troll. 15 points to Slytherin. I will inform Professor Dumbledore of this. Now, leave. They hurried out of the chamber and didn't speak at all until they reached the common room. Draco was very silent, but it was no wonder why. After all, he had sat against a wall and cried while his best friend and a girl fought a mountain troll. They had reached the secret Slytherin wall. "Tooth and nail," said Harry, and they entered. The common room was packed and noisy. Everyone was eating the food that had been sent down. Malvora, however, stood at the end of the passageway, her cat in her arms. "Don't worry," she said quietly. I won't tell everyone that you scream like a girl." She looked at Draco with a slight smile. Draco hung his head, scowling. "Malvora," Harry started. "Mal," she corrected. "Call me Mal." There was a very embarrassed pause. Then, they all looked up at each other and hurried off to get plates. But from that moment on, Malvora Melbark became their friend. There are some things you can't share without ending up liking each other, and knocking out a 12-foot mountain troll is one of them. As they entered November, the weather turned very cold. The mountains around the school became icy gray and the lake like chilled steel. Every morning the ground was covered in frost. Hagrid could be seen from the upstairs windows defrosting broomsticks on the Quidditch field, bundled up in a long moleskin overcoat, rabbit fur gloves, and enormous beaverskin boots. The Quidditch season had begun. On Saturday, Harry and Draco would be playing their first match after weeks of training, Slytherin versus Gryffindor. If Gryffindor won, they would move up into second place in the house championship. Hardly anyone had seen Harry play because Flynn had decided that, as their secret weapon, Harry should be kept, well, secret. But the news that he was playing Seeker, of course, leaked out, and Harry didn't know which was worse. People telling him he'd be brilliant, or people telling him they'd be running around underneath him holding a mattress. It was really lucky now that Harry had Malvora as a friend. She was sneaky and clever enough to know all the shortcuts to the homework assignments, and Harry didn't know how he would have survived without her, what with all the last-minute Quidditch practice Flint was making them do. She had also stolen Quidditch through the ages for Harry from the school library, which turned out to be a very interesting read. Harry learned that there were 700 ways of committing a Quidditch foul, and that all of them had happened during a World Cup match in 1473. That Seekers were usually the smallest and fastest players, and that most serious Quidditch accidents seemed to happen to them. That although people rarely died playing Quidditch, referees had been known to vanish and turn up months later in the Sahara Desert. Malvora had become a bit more relaxed around Draco since the affair with the mountain troll, since now she felt she had leverage against him if he continued to refuse to get her the Athenan fur coat. Whenever he opened his mouth to complain, she would mockingly mention how he cried like a little girl while she saved him from the troll and threatened to tell the whole house about it. Other than this, they all seemed to get along rather well. The day before the first Quidditch match, the three of them were out in the freezing courtyard during break, and Malvora had conjured them up a bright blue fire. They were standing with their backs to it, getting warm, when Snape crossed the yard. Harry noticed at once that Snape was limping. Harry, Draco, and Malvora moved closer together to block the fire from view. They were sure it wouldn't be allowed. Snape eyed them, but limped right past, and they got away lucky. The Slytherin common room was very noisy that evening. Harry, Draco, and Malvora sat next to each other by the window, facing the lake. Malvora was showing Draco a pen that would automatically correct his mistakes on his charms homework, but warning that she would only let him borrow it if he brushed camo for a week. Harry felt restless. Seeing Snape today had really bothered him, and he couldn't focus on relaxing about tomorrow when Snape's limp was all he could think about. Harry didn't trust him. Well, he didn't really trust anyone. It was practically a law of being Slytherin. If someone was acting suspicious, it was because they were up to something. Getting up, he told Draco and Malvora he was going out for a walk to clear his head. Harry knew that sneaking was not the best idea, but he thought that if he could at least see Snape once more, he might get a clue about his leg. He made his way down to the staff room and knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Nothing. Well, if there was no one inside, then taking a quick look wouldn't bother anyone. He pushed the door ajar and peered inside, and a horrible scene met his eyes. Snape and Filch were inside alone. Snape was holding his robes above his knees. One of his legs was bloody and mangled. Filch was handing Snape bandages. "Blasted thing," Snape was saying. "How are you supposed to keep your eyes on all three heads at once?" Harry tried to shut the door quietly, but... "Potter!" Snape's face was twisted with fury as he dropped his robes quickly to hide his leg. Harry gulped. "Professor, I was just going to ask." "Get out. Out." Harry left before Snape could punish him. He sprinted back downstairs. "Quick walk," Malvora said as Harry joined them. "What's wrong?" In a low whisper, Harry told them what he'd seen. "You know what this means?" He finished breathlessly. He tried to get past the three-headed dog at Halloween. That's where he was going when we saw him. He's after whatever it's guarding. And I'd bet that he let the troll in to make a diversion. Mal's eyes were narrowed in concentration. That makes sense, she said, but why? Why would Snape try to steal something Dumbledore's keeping safe? I swear, you two are mad, said Draco. If Snape really is trying to steal something from Hogwarts, it's for a good reason. How can you know that for sure? Asked Harry. I'm with Harry, Mal said. I wouldn't put anything past Snape. The real question is, what's the dog guarding? Harry went to bed with his head buzzing with the same question. Crabbe was snoring loudly, but Harry couldn't sleep. He tried to empty his mind. He needed to sleep. He had his first Quidditch match in a few hours, but the expression on Snape's face when Harry had seen his leg wasn't easy to forget. The next morning dawned very bright and cold. The Great Hall was full of the delicious smell of fried sausages and the cheerful chatter of everyone looking forward to a good Quidditch match. Harry hadn't touched his breakfast. He felt terrible. In an hour's time, he'd be walking onto the field. Draco didn't look well either. His face was paler than normal, and he was sort of just prodding at his bacon. The mail came as usual. As the owls flooded into the Great Hall, everyone's attention was caught at once by two long, thin packages carried by 12 large screech owls. Harry was just as interested as everyone else to see what was in these large parcels, and was amazed when the owls soared down and dropped them right in front of him and Draco, knocking plates to the floor. They had hardly fluttered out of the way when another owl dropped a letter in front of Draco, who ripped the letter open and held it out for Harry to read. Dear Draco, we are very proud that you've made it onto the Quidditch team. The parcels contain Nimbus 2000s for yourself and Harry Potter. Continue to impress us. With love, Mother and Father. Harry had difficulty hiding his glee as he and Draco tore into their parcels. Many eyes were staring at them, enviously. I knew I could bully Father into buying us brooms, but Nimbus 2000s? Draco grinned widely, proud to have the very best parents of everyone in the room. Even Harry, who knew nothing about the different brooms, thought they looked wonderful. Sleek and shiny, with mahogany handles and long tails of neat, straight twigs and Nimbus 2000 written in gold near the tops. Oi, why do Malfoy and Potter get broomsticks? Called out a red-haired Gryffindor boy. Because we're on the Quidditch team, Weasley. Draco snapped back, not hiding his joy. Come on, Harry, let's get out to the field. The nervous feeling in Harry's stomach had quelled a little. By 11 o'clock, the whole school seemed to be out in the stands around the Quidditch pitch. Many students had binoculars. The seats might be raised high in the air, but it was still difficult to see what was going on sometimes. Malvora joined Pansy, Crabbe, and Goyle in the top row. As a nice surprise to Harry and the team, the Slytherin spectators were all wearing pins that showed a snake choking a lion in support of their team. A few even had flags that shimmered green and flashed, "We hope you choke," in silver letters. Meanwhile, in a locker room, Harry, Draco, and the rest of the team were changing into their green Quidditch robes. Gryffindor would be playing in scarlet. All right, shut it and listen. Flint called for silence. We have 4 new members to the team, but that's no excuse for us to lose, he said. I expect you all to play as hard as you can and to get us points at any cost, got it? Everyone nodded. You'd better prove that you belong on this team, he threatened, eyes dark. Don't lose. Now come on, let's watch Gryffindor choke. Harry gave Draco a brief nod and followed the team members out of the locker room and, hoping his knees weren't going to give way, walked onto the field to loud cheers. Madam Hooch was refereeing. She stood in the middle of the field waiting for the two teams, her broom in her hand. Now, I want a nice fair game, all of you, she said, once they were all gathered around her. Harry noticed that she seemed to be speaking particularly to their captain, Marcus Flint. Out of the corner of his eye, Harry saw a fluttering flag high above, flashing "We hope you choke" over the crowd. His heart skipped. He felt braver. Mount your brooms, please. Harry clambered onto his Nimbus 2000. Madam Hooch gave a loud blast on her silver whistle. 15 brooms rose up high into the air. They were off. And the quaffle was taken immediately by Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor. What an excellent chaser that girl is, and rather attractive too. Jordan. Sorry, Professor. A Gryffindor, Lee Jordan, was doing the commentary for the match, closely watched by Professor McGonagall. And she's really belting along up there, a neat pass to Alicia Spinnet, a good find of Oliver Woods. Last year only a reserve, back to Johnson, and no, the Slytherins have taken the quaffle. Some first year whose name I can't remember throws the ball to Slytherin captain Marcus Flint, and off he goes, Flint flying like an eagle up there. He's going to SC. No, stopped by an excellent move by Gryffindor keeper Wood, and the Gryffindors take the quaffle. That's Chaser Katie Belloff. Gryffindor there, nice dive around Flint, off up the field, and OUCH. That must have hurt, hit in the back of the head by a bludger. Quaffle taken by the Slytherins. That's Adrian Pusey speeding off toward the goal posts, but he's blocked by a second bludger, sent his way by Fred or George Weasley, can't tell which. Nice play by the Gryffindor beater anyway, and Johnson goes. She's really flying, dodges a speeding bludger. The goalposts are ahead, come on, now. Angelina, keeper. Bletchley dives, misses, Gryffindor score. Gryffindor cheers filled the cold air, with howls and moans from the Slytherins. Way up above, Harry was gliding over the game, squinting about for some sign of the snitch. This was part of the game plan. When Angelina had scored, Harry had done a couple of loop-the-loops to let off his feelings. Now he was back to staring around for the snitch. Once he caught sight of a flash of gold, but it was just a reflection from one of the Weasley twins' wristwatches, and once a bludger decided to come pelting his way, more like a cannonball than anything, but Harry dodged it and Terrence Higgs came chasing after it. Slytherin in possession. Lee Jordan was saying, Chaser Pusey ducks 2 bludgers, 2 Weasleys, and Chaser Bell, and speeds toward the— wait a moment. Was that the snitch? A murmur ran through the crowd as Pusey dropped the quaffle, too busy looking over his shoulder at the flash of gold that had passed his left ear. Harry saw it. In a great rush of excitement, he dived downward after the streak of gold. Gryffindor seeker Ophelia Hart had seen it, too. Neck and neck, they hurtled toward the snitch. All the chasers seemed to have forgotten what they were supposed to be doing as they hung in midair to watch. Harry was faster than Hart. He could see the little round ball, wings fluttering, darting up ahead. He put on an extra spurt of speed. Wham! A roar of rage echoed from the Gryffindors below. Flint had blocked Hart on purpose, and she spun off course, holding on for dear life. Foul! Screamed the Gryffindors. Madame Hooch spoke angrily to Flint and then ordered a free shot at the goalpost for Gryffindor. But in all the confusion, of course, the golden snitch had disappeared from sight again. Down in the stands, the Slytherins were complaining loudly. They can't prove that Flint did that on purpose. Pansy was yelling. But Flint should have been sneakier, said Mal. You don't just throw yourself at someone and expect to get away with it. Why don't you join the team if you know so much about it? Pansy snapped at her. I already said that I don't like brooms. Mal rolled her eyes. Don't be so stupid. Lee Jordan was finding it difficult not to take sides. So, after that obvious and disgusting bit of cheating, Jordan, growled Professor McGonagall. I mean, after that open and revolting foul. Jordan, I'm warning you. All right. Flint nearly kills the Gryffindor seeker, which could happen to anyone, I'm sure. So a penalty to Gryffindor, taken by Spinnet, who puts it away. No trouble, and we continue play, Gryffindor still in possession. It was as Harry dodged another bludger, which went spinning dangerously past his head, that it happened. His broom gave a sudden, frightening lurch. For a split second, he thought he was going to fall. He gripped the broom tightly with both his hands and knees. He'd never felt anything like that. It happened again. It was as though the broom was trying to buck him off. But Nimbus 2000s did not suddenly decide to buck their riders off. Harry tried to turn back toward the Slytherin goalposts. He had half a mind to ask Flint to call timeout, and then he realized that his broom was completely out of his control. He couldn't turn it. He couldn't direct it at all. It was zigzagging through the air, and every now and then making violent swishing movements that almost unseated him. Lee was still commentating. Slytherin in possession, Flint with the quaffle, passes Spinnet, passes Bell, hit hard in the face by a bludger, hope it broke his nose. Only joking, Professor. Malfoy takes the quaffle, Slytherin score, oh no. The Slytherins were cheering. No one seemed to have noticed that Harry's broom was behaving strangely. It was carrying him slowly higher, away from the game, jerking and twitching as it went. Goyle gave a deep laugh. Look at Potter. Suddenly, people were pointing up at Harry all over the stands. His broom had started to roll over and over, with him only just managing to hold on. Then the whole crowd gasped. Harry's broom had given a wild jerk and Harry swung off it. He was now dangling from it, holding on with only one hand. He's not playing around, is he? Pansy gasped. Malvora began looking around at the crowd. Ah, she said under her breath. Snape was a few rows down and over. He had his eyes fixed on Harry and was muttering nonstop under his breath. Jinxing the broom, she muttered. Harry's broom was vibrating so hard, it was almost impossible for him to hang on much longer. The whole crowd was on its feet, watching, terrified, as Draco and Adrian flew up to try and pull Harry safely onto one of their brooms. But it was no good. Every time they got near him, the broom would jump higher still. They dropped lower and circled beneath him, obviously hoping to catch him if he fell. Flint seized the quaffle and scored 5 times without anyone noticing. I can't see Draco, Pansy whined, trying to peer over the heads of students standing in front of her. Over here, Pansy, Mal said, darting across the rows to be above Snape. Pansy followed, hoping to get a better viewpoint of Draco. Malvora stopped, 2 rows above Snape. Stand in front of me, she said to Pansy, who hastily obeyed. This isn't any better than over there, Pansy complained, standing on the seat in front of Mal. Malvora suddenly shoved the other girl forward with all her might. Pansy screamed and fell helplessly over the rows, straight into Snape, who jumped up in surprise and tumbled backwards into Professor Quirrell, who was sitting in the row in front. Snape cursed, no longer chanting under his breath. The chaos was enough. Up in the air, Harry was suddenly able to clamber back onto his broom. Oops, Mal yelled down at Pansy. Saw the... Harry was speeding toward the ground when the crowd saw him clap his hand to his mouth as though he was about to be sick. He hit the field on all fours, coughed, and something gold fell into his hand. I've got the snitch, he shouted, waving it above his head, and the game ended in complete confusion. He didn't catch it. He nearly swallowed it. Ophelia Hart was still complaining 20 minutes later, but it made no difference. Harry hadn't broken any rules, and Lee Jordan sadly told the results. Slytherin had won by 180 points to 70. Harry heard none of this, though. He was being made a cup of strong tea back in Hagrid's hut, with Draco and Malvora. It was definitely Snape, Mal was saying. I saw him cursing Harry's broomstick, muttering and whatnot. Why I knocked him over was when Harry could fly again. Rubbish, said Hagrid. Why would Snape do something like that? Harry, Draco, and Mal looked at one another, wondering what to tell him. Harry decided on the truth. I found out something about him, he told Hagrid. He tried to get past that 3-headed dog on Halloween. It bit him. We think he was trying to steal whatever it's guarding. Hagrid dropped the teapot. How do you know about Fluffy? He said. Fluffy. Kuta, Mal commented. Yeah, he's mine. Bought him off a Greek chappie I met in the pub last year. I lent him to Dumbledore to guard the... Yes, said Harry eagerly. Now, don't ask me any more, said Hagrid gruffly. That's top secret, that is. But Snape's trying to steal it. Rubbish, said Hagrid again. Snape's a Hogwarts teacher. He'd do nothing of the sort. So he just tried to kill Harry for sport, then? Asked Draco. I'm telling you, you're wrong, said Hagrid hotly. I don't know why Harry's broom acted like that. But Snape wouldn't try and kill a student. Now listen to me. All 3 of ya, you're meddling in things that don't concern ya. It's dangerous. You forget that dog. And you forget what it's guarding. That's between Professor Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. Aha, said Harry. So there's someone called Nicholas Flamel involved, is there? Hagrid looked furious with himself. Christmas was coming. One morning in mid-December, Hogwarts woke to find itself covered in several feet of snow. The lake froze solid, and students were punished for bewitching snowballs so that they followed Quirrell around, bouncing off the back of his turban. The few owls that managed to battle their way through the stormy sky to deliver mail had to be nursed back to health by Hagrid before they could fly off again. No one could wait for the holidays to start. While the Great Hall had a roaring fire, the drafty corridors had become icy and a bitter wind rattled the windows in the classrooms. The Slytherin common room was among the coldest places in the castle, worst of all being Professor Snape's classes, where their breath rose in a mist before them, and they kept as close as possible to their hot cauldrons. "I'll be glad to go home for Christmas," said Draco, one potions class. "I'm staying," said Harry. It was true that Harry wasn't going back to Privet Drive for Christmas. Snape had come around the week before, making a list of students who would be staying for the holidays, and Harry had signed up at once. He didn't feel sorry for himself at all. This would probably be the best Christmas he'd ever had. Malvora was staying, too, because her parents were out of the country on business. When they left the dungeons at the end of potions, they found a large fir tree blocking the corridor ahead. Two enormous feet sticking out at the bottom, and a loud puffing sound told them that Hagrid was behind it. The youngest Weasley was offering to help Hagrid with the tree. Draco had taken a personal disliking of Ron Weasley, because Ron had made a point of accusing Draco of cheating his way onto the Quidditch team after the match. Not that he'd liked him beforehand, but now, the red-haired boy was Draco's very favorite target. "Would you mind moving out of the way?" Draco drawled behind Ron and Hagrid. "Are you trying to earn some extra money, Weasley? Hoping to be gamekeeper yourself when you leave Hogwarts? I suppose. That hut of Hagrid's must seem like a palace compared to what your family's used to." Ron dived to Draco just as Snape came up the stairs. "Weasley." Ron let go of the front of Draco's robes. "Fighting is against Hogwarts rules," said Snape silkily. 5 points from Gryffindor, Weasley, and be grateful it isn't more. "Move along, all of you." Draco, Harry, and Malvora skirted along past the tree, scattering needles everywhere. "You shouldn't have said any of that," Harry said immediately when they were out of hearing distance. "Always quick to defend, aren't you, Potter?" Draco snapped. "Look," said Harry, "I'm already pushing my luck with Snape as it is. It doesn't help when you go around picking trouble." "You're making a bad name for us," Malvora added. "Since when do you care about your name?" cried Draco. "I don't really," Malvora shrugged. "I just thought Harry might. He is the boy who lived, after all. Don't want to make it the boy who trailed along after spoiled little Malfoy." Harry couldn't agree more. "Don't expect me to leave Weasley alone," said Draco. "Oh, by all means, provoke him when you're alone with him," said Mal. "But you should be warned, I won't keep from telling the rest of the house how you got beat up by a Weasley." "Stop fighting," said Harry before Draco could retaliate. "It's nearly Christmas. Let's go see what the Great Hall looks like." So the three of them went into the Great Hall, where Hagrid was putting up the Christmas tree, and Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were busy with the Christmas decorations. The hall looked spectacular. Festoons of holly and mistletoe hung all around the walls, and no less than 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the room, some sparkling with tiny icicles, some glittering with hundreds of candles. "One more day until the holidays," said Mal in awe. "That reminds me," said Harry. "We should be in the library, trying to find out more about Nicholas Flamel." "Oh yeah," said Mal, tearing her eyes away from Professor Flitwick, who had golden bubbles blossoming out of his wand and was trailing them over the branches of the new tree. "Hey, Hagrid," she called as they followed him out of the Great Hall. "Sure you don't want to tell us more about Nicholas Flamel?" Hagrid looked shocked. "Listen here, I've told you drop it. It's nothing to you what that dog's garden." "That's what I've been trying to say," mumbled Draco. "We must have been through hundreds of books already, and we can't find him anywhere," said Harry. "Just give us a hint." "I'm saying nothing," said Hagrid flatly. "Well then, we'll just have to put ourselves in unnecessary trouble and find out ourselves," said Malvora, cheerfully, and they left Hagrid looking disgruntled and hurried off to the library. They had indeed been searching books for Flamel's name ever since Hagrid had let it slip, because how else were they going to find out what Snape was trying to steal? The trouble was, it was very hard to know where to begin, not knowing what Flamel might have done to get himself into a book. He wasn't in great wizards of the 20th century or notable magical names of our time. He was missing, too, from important modern magical discoveries and a study of recent developments in wizardry. And then, of course, there was the sheer size of the library. Tens of thousands of books, thousands of shelves, hundreds of narrow rows. Malvora tried a number of spells to see if she could get a book to come to her with Flamel's name in it, while Draco muttered and complained about wasting his time with meaningless tasks. Harry wandered over to the restricted section. Malvora had been the first to suggest that Flammel might be somewhere in there. Unfortunately, you needed a specially signed note from one of the teachers to look in any of the restricted books, and Harry knew he'd never get one. These were the books containing powerful dark magic never taught at Hogwarts, and only read by older students studying advanced defense against the dark arts. "What are you looking for, boy?" "Nothing," said Harry. Madame Pants, the librarian, brandished a feather duster at him. "You'd better get out, then. Go on out." Wishing he'd been a bit quicker at thinking up some story, Harry left the library. He, Draco, and Malvora had already agreed they'd better not ask Madame Pants where they could find Flammel. They were sure she'd be able to tell them, but they couldn't risk someone hearing what they were up to. This was all a very secret business to the three of them. Harry waited outside in the corridor to see if the other two had found anything, but he wasn't very hopeful. They had only been looking for 2 weeks, after all, but as they only had odd moments between lessons, it wasn't surprising they'd found nothing. What they really needed was a nice long search without Madame Pants breathing down their necks. 5 minutes later, Draco and Malvora joined him, scowling. They went off to lunch. "This isn't any of our business," Draco groaned. "We should stay out of it." "You're such a coward," Malvora teased, reenacting Draco's girly scream from when they fought the troll. "No," snapped Draco. "I just have better things to do with my time than trying to solve mysteries that involve illegal, three-headed dogs and trolls." "Well, let's cut you some slack, then. All you have to do is ask your parents about Flammel while you're on your happy vacation, and Harry and I will use all other means to find out on our own. Not too much work for you, I hope." Draco merely sneered. Once the holidays had started, Harry and Malvora were having too good a time to think much about Flammel. They had the dormitories to themselves, and the common room was completely empty, so they were able to get the good sofa by the fire. They sat by the hour, eating anything they could spear on a toasting fork: bread, English muffins, marshmallows, and plotting ways to kidnap Madame Pants and force her to tell them about Flammel. Malvora also spent a fair deal of time trying to teach Harry how to be clever. These included such tasks as discovering secret passageways, learning spells that would quiet your steps, and playing strategy games like wizard chess. Malvora was convinced that once they discovered who Flammel was, they were going to have to use cunning to take the next step, whatever that step may be. Therefore, she secured a wizard chess set. Harry didn't ask where she got it from, and began to teach him the basics so that he could sharpen his mind. Wizard chess was exactly like Muggle chess, except that the figures were alive, which made it a lot like directing troops in battle. Harry wasn't a very good player yet, and his chessmen kept shouting different bits of advice at him, which was confusing. "Don't send me there. Can't you see her knight? Send him. We can afford to lose him." On Christmas Eve, Harry went to bed looking forward to the next day for the food and the fun, but not expecting any presents at all. When he woke early in the morning, however, the first thing he saw when he entered the common room was a small Christmas tree with a pile of presents beneath it. "Morning," said Mal, who was stretched out on the sofa, as if she had slept there all night. "Those presents are for us. We're the only Slytherins not at home, after all." Harry walked over to the tree with Malvora and picked up the top parcel. It was wrapped in thick brown paper and scrawled across, "It was to Harry, from Hagrid." Inside was a roughly cut wooden flute. Hagrid had obviously whittled it himself. Harry blew it. It sounded a bit like an owl. A second, very small parcel contained a note. "We received your message and enclose your Christmas present. From Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia." Taped to the note was a 50-pence piece. "That's friendly," said Harry. Malvora was fascinated by the 50 pence. "How peculiar," she said. "This is Muggle money." "You can keep it," said Harry, laughing at the expression on Mal's face. "Hagrid and my aunt and uncle. So who sent these?" "That's from Draco." Malvora pointed at a neatly wrapped parcel. "It's got his family crest on it. Odd. I was betting on him being selfish and not sending you anything." Harry tore open the parcel to find a rather expensive-looking wristwatch and some chocolate frogs. "He didn't write a note," said Malvora, passively. "Must not want to admit that he thinks you're his friend." "Thoughtful, though," said Harry, strapping on the watch. "I don't believe it," Malvora muttered. She was holding her own parcel, wrapped as perfectly as Harry's, and with the Malfoy crest stamped onto it. She ripped it open and gasped in delight as she pulled out a shimmering feather coat. "Athenan dragon feathers," she squeaked, slipping it on. Her expression changed slightly from overjoyed to a bit flustered. "What's wrong?" asked Harry. "Now, I have nothing to use to blackmail him." "I'm sure you'll find something," said Harry, which seemed to lift her spirits significantly. Harry had only one parcel left. He picked it up and felt it. It was very light. He unwrapped it. Something fluid and silvery gray went slithering to the floor where it lay in gleaming folds. Malvora gasped. "Impossible," she said in a hushed voice, losing interest in her coat. "It can't be. Those are even more rare and valuable than dragon feathers." "What is it?" Harry picked the shining, silvery cloth off the floor. It was strange to the touch, like water woven into material. "An invisibility cloak," said Malvora in awe. "Well, try it on." Harry threw the cloak around his shoulders, and Malvora clapped her hands in excitement. Look at your reflection." She ran to the windows facing the lake, where her reflection looked back, clear as day. Harry came to stand beside her, but didn't see his own reflection staring back. He looked down at his feet, but they were gone. He pulled the cloak down, and he was just a head suspended in midair, his body completely invisible. "You've got a note too," said Mal, stooping to pick a note off the floor. Harry pulled off the cloak and seized the letter. Written in narrow, loopy writing he had never seen before were the following words. "Your father left this in my possession before. He died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well. A very Merry Christmas to you." There was no signature. Harry stared at the note. Malvora was trying on the cloak. "I could sneak anywhere with one of these," she said. "If this ever goes missing for a couple of days, don't worry about it." "What's the matter?" "Nothing," said Harry. He felt very strange. Who had sent the cloak? Had it really once belonged to his father? "Cheer up," Malvora ordered, chucking a pillow at him. "It's Christmas, and I didn't get a single present from my parents." A wide smile spread over her face. "That's cause for celebration." The invisibility cloak was put out of Harry's mind temporarily as the festivities began. Harry had never in all his life had such a Christmas dinner. 100 fat, roast turkeys, mountains of roast and boiled potatoes, platters of chipolatas, tureens of buttered peas, silver boats of thick, rich gravy and cranberry sauce, and stacks of wizard crackers every few feet along the table. These fantastic party favors were nothing like the feeble muggle ones the Dursleys usually bought, with their little plastic toys and their flimsy paper hats inside. Harry pulled a wizard cracker with Malvora, and it didn't just bang. It went off with a blast like a cannon and engulfed them in a cloud of blue smoke, while from the inside exploded a rear admiral's hat and several live, white mice. Up at the high table, Dumbledore had swapped his pointed wizard's hat for a flowered bonnet, and was chuckling merrily at a joke Professor Flitwick had just read him. Flaming Christmas puddings followed the turkey. Harry watched Hagrid getting redder and redder in the face as he called for more wine, finally kissing Professor McGonagall on the cheek, who, to Harry's amazement, giggled and blushed, her top hat lopsided. When Harry finally left the table, he was laden down with a stack of things out of the crackers, including a pack of non-explodable, luminous balloons, a grow-your-own-warts kit, and his own new wizard chess set. The white mice had disappeared, and Harry had a nasty feeling as he looked at Malvora's wiggling pockets. They were going to end up as Camo's Christmas dinner. Harry and Malvora spent a happy afternoon having a furious snowball fight on the grounds. Well, it would have just been them if Malvora hadn't taken it upon herself to hunt down unsuspecting members of other houses and pelt them with snowballs. They successfully drenched a Ravenclaw named Gregory Grayson, who was just out reading, and soaked 2 Hufflepuffs who were building a snow fort. At last, they started a war with a Gryffindor named Teresa Goodwin, and then, cold, wet, and gasping for breath, they returned to the fire in the Slytherin common room, where Harry broke out his new chess set by losing spectacularly to Mal. After a meal of turkey sandwiches, crumpets, trifle, and Christmas cake, they felt too full and sleepy to do much before bed except sit and watch Camo chase an ornament around the common room. It had been Harry's best Christmas day ever. Yet something had been nagging at the back of his mind all day. Not until he climbed into bed was he free to think about it. the invisibility cloak, and whoever had sent it. Malvora, full of turkey and cake and with nothing mysterious to bother her, had fallen asleep out on the sofa in the common room, where Harry suspected she'd been sleeping the whole holiday break. Harry, at last, leaned over the side of his own bed and pulled the cloak from under it. His father's. This had been his father's. He let the material flow over his hands, smoother than silk, light as air. Use it well, the note had said. He had to try it now. He slipped out of bed and wrapped the cloak around himself. Looking down at his legs, he saw only moonlight and shadows. It was a very funny feeling. Use it well. Suddenly, Harry felt wide awake. The whole of Hogwarts was open to him in this cloak. Excitement flooded through him as he stood there in the dark and silence. He could go anywhere in this, anywhere, and Filch would never know. He crept out of the dormitory, up the stairs, and across the common room. Malvora's hand was dangling off the sofa. Should Harry wake her? Something held him back, his father's cloak. He felt that this time, the first time, he wanted to use it alone. He snuck as quietly as possible through the darkness, past a snoozing camo, and down the passageway that led into the corridor. Where should he go? He stopped, his heart racing in thought. And then it came to him. The restricted section in the library. He'd be able to read as long as he liked, as long as it took to find out who Flammel was. He set off, drawing the invisibility cloak tight around him as he walked. The library was pitch black and very eerie. Harry lit a lamp to see his way along the rows of books. The lamp looked as if it was floating along in midair, and even though Harry could feel his arms supporting it, the sight gave him the creeps. The restricted section was right at the back of the library. Stepping carefully over the rope that separated these books from the rest of the library, he held up his lamp to read the titles. They didn't tell him much. Their peeling, faded gold letters spelled words in languages Harry couldn't understand. Some had no title at all. One book had a dark stain on it that looked horribly like blood. The hairs on the back of Harry's neck prickled. Maybe he was imagining it, maybe not, but he thought a faint whispering was coming from the books, as though they knew someone was there who shouldn't be. He had to start somewhere. Setting the lamp down carefully on the floor, he looked along the bottom shelf for an interesting-looking book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty because it was very heavy and, balancing it on his knee, let fall open. A piercing, blood-curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry snapped it shut, but the shriek went on, one high, unbroken, ear-splitting note. He stumbled backward and knocked over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicking, he heard footsteps coming down the corridor outside. Stuffing the shrieking book back on the shelf, he ran for it. He passed Filch in the doorway. Filch's pale, wild eyes looked straight through him, and Harry slipped under Filch's outstretched arm and streaked off up the corridor, the book's shrieks still ringing in his ears. He came to a sudden halt in front of a tall suit of armor. He had been so busy getting away from the library, he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps because it was dark, he didn't recognize where he was at all. There was a suit of armor near the kitchens, he knew, but he must be 5 floors above there. You asked me to come directly to you, Professor, if anyone was wandering around at night, and someone's been in the library. Restricted section. Harry felt the blood drain out of his face. Wherever he was, Filch must know a shortcut, because his soft, greasy voice was getting nearer, and to his horror, it was Snape who replied. The restricted section? Well, they can't be far, we'll catch them. Harry stood rooted to the spot as Filch and Snape came around the corner ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor, and if they came much nearer, they'd knock right into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. He backed away as quietly as he could. A door stood ajar to his left. It was his only hope. He squeezed through it, holding his breath, trying not to move it, and to his relief, he managed to get inside the room without their noticing anything. They walked straight past, and Harry leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, listening to their footsteps dying away. That had been close, very close. It was a few seconds before he noticed anything about the room he had hidden in. It looked like an unused classroom. The dark shapes of desks and chairs were piled against the walls, and there was an upturned wastepaper basket, But propped against the wall facing him was something that didn't look as if it belonged there, something that looked as if someone had just put it there to keep it out of the way. It was a magnificent mirror as high as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame, standing on two clawed feet. There was an inscription carved around the top. Eristra eru oit ube kafru oidon wosi. His panic fading now that there was no sound of Filch and Snape, Harry moved nearer to the mirror, wanting to look at himself, but see no reflection again. He stepped in front of it. He had to clap his hand to his mouth to stop himself from screaming. He whirled around. His heart was pounding far more furiously than when the book had screamed, for he had seen not only himself in the mirror, but a whole crowd of people standing right behind him. But the room was empty. Breathing very fast, he turned slowly back to the mirror. There he was, reflected in it, white and scared-looking, and there, reflected behind him, were at least 10 others. Harry looked over his shoulder, but still, no one was there. Or were they all invisible too? Was he in fact in a room full of invisible people, and this mirror's trick was that it reflected them, invisible or not? He looked in the mirror again. A woman standing right behind his reflection was smiling at him and waving. He reached out a hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd touch her. Their reflections were so close together, but he felt only air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair and her eyes. Her eyes are just like mine, Harry thought, edging a little closer to the glass. Bright green, exactly the same shape, but then he noticed that she was crying, smiling, but crying at the same time. The tall, thin, black-haired man standing next to her put his arm around her. He wore glasses, and his hair was very untidy. It stuck up at the back, just as Harry's did. Harry was so close to the mirror now that his nose was nearly touching that of his reflection. "Mom," he whispered. "Dad." They just looked at him, smiling. And slowly, Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw other pairs of green eyes like his, other noses like his, even a little old man who looked as though he had Harry's knobbling knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potter smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them, his hands pressed flat against the glass, as though he was hoping to fall right through it and reach them. He had a powerful kind of ache inside him, half joy, half terrible sadness. How long he stood there, he didn't know. The reflections did not fade, and he looked and looked until a distant noise brought him back to his senses. He couldn't stay here. He had to find his way back to bed. He tore his eyes away from his mother's face, whispered, "I'll come back," and hurried from the room. "Sounds dark," said Malvora, thoughtfully. Harry had to tell her about the mirror. She'd known as soon as she saw him in the morning that he'd been up to something. So he relayed the previous night's story to her, hoping she would have some theory about the mirror, or perhaps had seen it before when she was sneaking around the castle. "You can come tonight. I'm going back. You can take a look at the mirror for yourself." "And see the whole family of famous Potters?" She laughed. "What an honor." "I could see your family, too," said Harry. Malvora's eyes darkened. "Let's hope that it only shows dead people," she said. Her expression reverted to normal rather quickly. "Anyway, it's too bad you didn't find anything about Flammel. You should have been sneakier, not eating." Harry couldn't eat. He had seen his parents and would be seeing them again tonight. He had almost forgotten about Flammel. It didn't seem very important anymore. Who cared about the three-headed dog and what it was guarding? What did it matter if Snape stole it, really? What Harry feared most was that he might not be able to find the mirror room again. With Mal covered in the cloak, too, they had to walk much more slowly the next night. They tried retracing Harry's route from the library, wandering around the dark passageways for nearly an hour. "I haven't checked on Camo for a while," said Mal. "We could always look for the room in the daytime." "No," Harry hissed. "I know it's here somewhere." They passed the ghost of a tall, witch gliding in the opposite direction, but saw no one else. Just as Mal was about to turn around and leave Harry alone in the hall, Harry spotted the suit of armor. "It's here, just here, yes." They pushed the door open. Harry dropped the cloak from around his shoulders and ran to the mirror. There they were. His mother and father beamed at the sight of him. "See," Harry whispered. "No," said Mal, who was standing uncertainly by the door, as if she feared what she might see in the mirror. "Look, Look at them, there are loads of them. Looks like a normal mirror to me. Looking at it properly, go on, stand where I am. Harry stepped aside, and Malvora hesitantly stepped in front of the mirror. With her there, Harry couldn't see his family anymore, just Malvora in her Athenan feather coat. Malvora, though, was staring transfixed at her image. Whoa, can you see all your family standing around you? Of course not, stupid, she snapped. I'm all alone. Well, unless you count Camo and all the dragons. What? You heard me. There's a miniature Zuffian and a Styxian dragon. Malvora tore her eyes away from this splendid sight to look excitedly at Harry. Let me have another look, said Harry. No, you're only surrounded by dragons. What's interesting about that? I want to see my parents. I said no. A sudden noise outside the corridor put an end to their discussion. They hadn't realized how loudly they'd been talking. Quick! Malvora threw the cloak back over them as the luminous eyes of Mrs. Norris came around the door. Mal and Harry stood quite still, both thinking the same thing. Did the cloak work on cats? After what seemed an age, she turned and left. And off to Filch she goes. Come on. And Malvora pulled Harry out of the room. The snow still hadn't melted the next morning. Let's finish our round of chess, said Mal. No. Well then, why don't we sneak attack students outside again? No, you go. Malvora sighed an angry sound. You're being an idiot. You know that? She accused. What's that mean? Harry snapped angrily. You want to go back to that mirror? Don't. It's definitely got dark powers in it, and messing with those should be avoided. Plus, you get so lost in that thing that you won't even notice if Filch or Snape came into the room. You'd be in a lot of trouble. What do you know about it anyway? Said Harry. Malvora shrugged, eyes narrowed. Nothing really. It could be totally safe, so have fun. With this, she turned and walked away. But Harry only had one thought in his head, which was to get back in front of the mirror, and Malvora wasn't going to stop him. That third night, he found his way more quickly than before. He was walking so fast he knew he was making more noise than was wise, but he didn't meet anyone. And there were his mother and father smiling at him again, and one of his grandfathers nodding happily. Harry sank down to sit on the floor in front of the mirror. There was nothing to stop him from staying here all night with his family. Nothing at all. Except... So, back again, Harry? Harry felt as though his insides had turned to ice. He looked behind him. Sitting on one of the desks by the wall was none other than Albus Dumbledore. Harry must have walked straight past him, so desperate to get to the mirror he hadn't noticed him. I didn't see you, sir. Strange how nearsighted being invisible can make you, said Dumbledore, and Harry was relieved to see that he was smiling. So, said Dumbledore, slipping off the desk to sit on the floor with Harry, you, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erist. I didn't know it was called that, sir. But I expect you've realized by now what it does. It, well, shows me my family. And it showed your friend Mal herself with dragons. How did you know? I don't need a cloak to become invisible, said Dumbledore gently. Now, can you think what the Mirror of Erist shows us all? Harry shook his head. Let me explain. The happiest man on earth would be able to use the Mirror of Erist like a normal mirror. That is, he would look into it and see himself exactly as he is. Does that help? Harry thought. Then he said slowly, it shows us what we want, whatever we want. Yes and no, said Dumbledore quietly. It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. You, who have never known your family, see them standing around you. Malvora Melbark, who is ashamed and embarrassed by her own family, sees herself standing with the company of dragons, which she finds to be much more relatable than humans. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge or truth. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they have seen or been driven mad, not knowing if what it shows is real or even possible. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Harry, and I ask you not to go looking for it again. If you ever do run across it, you will now be prepared. It is not due to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Remember that. Now, why don't you put that admirable cloak back on and get off to bed? Harry stood up. Sir, Professor Dumbledore, can I ask you something? Obviously, you just done so, Dumbledore smiled. You may ask me one more thing, however. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I, I see myself holding a pair of thick, woolen socks. Harry stared. One can never have enough socks, said Dumbledore. Another Christmas has come and gone, and I didn't get a single pair. People will insist on giving me books. It was only when he was back in bed that it struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. But then he thought it had been quite a personal question. Dumbledore had convinced Harry not to go looking for the mirror of Ariste again, and for the rest of the Christmas holidays the invisibility cloak stayed folded at the bottom of his trunk. Harry wished he could forget what he'd seen in the mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He started having nightmares. Over and over again, he dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light, while a high voice cracked with laughter. "Told you so," said Malvora, when Harry told her about the dangers of the mirror.